I never expected to attend my sister's wedding as anything other than her maid of honor. But there I was, clutching a document that would destroy everything she'd schemed for. The prenuptial agreement felt heavy in my hands as I watched them exchange vows at my dream venue with my fiancé. Sometimes karma needs a little help, I thought, as I waited for the perfect moment to reveal what I knew. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my parents' lakeside home as I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart shattering with each word that floated from the sunroom. I'd come home early from my business trip, excited to surprise everyone with news about my promotion. Instead, I was the one receiving a devastating surprise. Natalie was always too soft for someone like you, Ryan. My mother's voice carried clearly through the partially open door. She's ambitious, yes, but she lacks the social connections you need. Vanessa has always been the one with the right kind of determination. The kind that would complement your career perfectly. I couldn't believe my ears. My own mother was trying to convince my fiancé of 6 years that my younger sister would make a better wife. 6 years of building a life. Together, planning our future, even picking out our wedding venue for the ceremony that was only 4 months away. Honestly, Ryan, the Willow Creek estate is wasted on Natalie's simple tastes, my mother continued. Vanessa would know how to showcase it properly for the photos. She's been dying to get married there since she was a teenager. And with her connections to the Hamilton family, your judgeship would practically be guaranteed next year. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I expected Ryan to defend me, to laugh off my mother's ridiculous suggestion. We'd been together since law school. We'd struggled through student loans, celebrated passing the bar exam together, and supported each other through every career move. He knew me better than anyone. Mrs. Patterson, I don't know. Ryan finally responded, his hesitation already a betrayal. Natalie and I have built so much together. And what do you have to show for it? My mother's dismissive tone cut like a knife. A mid-level position at a firm that barely makes the city rankings. Vanessa already has partnerships with 3 of the top firms in Boston. Just think about it. You two would be unstoppable together. I backed away silently, my promotion news suddenly insignificant. I'd been offered partnership at my firm, the youngest person ever to achieve it, and had flown home early to share my triumph with my family and the man I loved. The irony was crushing. The worst part wasn't my mother's betrayal. I'd grown accustomed to her comparing me unfavorably to my sister. It was Ryan's silence, his consideration of the proposition, that truly devastated me. I slipped out of the house unseen and drove to our apartment in a daze. We'd chosen it for its proximity to both our offices, a practical decision we'd made together. Every corner of it contained memories of our relationship. The second-hand couch we'd bought when we first moved in, the expensive coffee machine Ryan had surprised me with after I won my first major case, the framed photo from the day he proposed at the harbor. Instead of confronting them immediately, I made a critical decision to watch and wait. Perhaps it was the lawyer in me, but I needed evidence before making accusations. If Ryan was truly considering my mother's suggestion, I would see the signs. The changes were subtle at first. Ryan began mentioning Vanessa in casual conversation, how impressive her latest court victory was, how well connected her clients were, how she'd invited him to join her table at a charity gala while I was working on a case in Chicago. Each comment felt like a paper cut, small but undeniably painful. Then came the late-night texts he'd quickly hide when I entered the room, the business lunches that extended well past office hours, and the sudden interest in social events he'd previously dismissed as pretentious networking. "You're being paranoid," my friend Diane insisted when I confided my suspicions over coffee. "They're practically family now that you're engaged. It would be weird if they didn't get along." I wanted to believe her, I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach as Ryan's behavior became increasingly distant. Our wedding planning sessions, once filled with excitement and laughter, now felt strained and perfunctory. "Do you think the Willow Creek estate is really the best venue for us?" Ryan asked one evening, 6 weeks after I'd overheard that conversation. "It's quite traditional, and your sister mentioned this amazing modern art gallery that's just started hosting weddings." "My sister discussed wedding venues with you?" I kept my voice deliberately calm, watching his reaction carefully. "It just came up when we had coffee last week," he replied, avoiding my eyes. "She mentioned how the lighting would be perfect for your complexion." "You had coffee with Vanessa?" I hadn't been told about any coffee meetings. "It wasn't planned," Ryan said quickly. "We bumped into each other downtown when I was heading back from court. It would have been rude not to stop for a quick chat." The lies were becoming more frequent, each one more elaborate than the last. I began documenting everything: the inconsistencies in his stories, the unexplained absences, the text messages. I glimpsed from Vanessa with hearts and inside jokes I wasn't privy to. The final confirmation came when I received a call from the wedding planner at Willow Creek Estate. "Ms. Patterson, I wanted to confirm the change of deposit holder for your September reservation. Your sister mentioned there might be some confusion when she made the update." "What update?" I asked, my knuckles white around the phone. "The name change on the reservation," she explained uncomfortably. "It's now under Vanessa Patterson and Ryan Bennett. Your sister said it was a surprise for you, but I wanted to make sure everything was in order." I thanked her calmly, hung up, and then systematically began to investigate what else had been happening behind my back. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was meticulously planned. They'd been working together for months, it seemed, carefully laying the groundwork while keeping me in the dark. That evening, I prepared Ryan's favorite dinner, poured his preferred whiskey, and waited for him to come home. He entered our apartment looking guilty, his tie loosened and his eyes unable to meet mine. "We need to talk," I said quietly. "About?" He tried to sound casual as he took the offered glass, but his hand trembled slightly. "About you and Vanessa. About the Willow Creek Estate reservation. About everything you've been hiding from me." The color drained from his face. "Natalie, I can explain. It's not what you think. I think my mother convinced you that my sister would be better for your career. I think you've been seeing her behind my back for months. I think you changed our wedding venue reservation to her name." I maintained perfect composure, the same way I did when cross-examining a hostile witness. "Please tell me which part I've misunderstood." Ryan's explanation was a masterclass in manipulation. He claimed he'd been struggling with how to tell me, insisted he never meant to hurt me, suggested that our relationship had been failing for years, even though I'd seen no signs of it. The final insult came when he suggested we'd be better as friends and colleagues rather than spouses. "We've grown apart," he said, as if 6 years of shared dreams could simply evaporate without my notice. "Vanessa and it just happened. We didn't plan it." I almost laughed at the absurdity of his claim. Nothing just happened with my sister. Vanessa calculated every move, every relationship, every career decision with the precision of a chess grandmaster. And Ryan, ambitious and image-conscious, had apparently calculated that she was the better Patterson sister for his future. As he continued his rehearsed speech about mutual respect and hoping we could eventually all be family again, I realized something profound. I felt more anger than heartbreak. The man I thought I loved would never have betrayed me this way. The person standing before me was a stranger wearing a familiar face. "I've been offered partnership at Collins and Westfield," I said, interrupting his monologue. "What?" Ryan looked genuinely surprised. Collins and Westfield was a rival to the firm where he'd been trying to make partner for years. "I was coming home to tell everyone the day I overheard my mother trying to set you up with Vanessa." I'm the youngest partner in the firm's history. I stood up, gathering the dinner plates I'd so carefully prepared. You should pack your things tonight. I'll be staying with Diane until you've moved out. The shock on his face gave me a small measure of satisfaction. He'd underestimated me, just as my family always had. It was time they all learned that was a serious mistake. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I discovered the full extent of their betrayal 3 days later. While Ryan was clearing his belongings from our apartment under Diane's watchful eye, I was at the office, burying myself in case files to avoid thinking about the ruins of my personal life. My assistant, Miguel, knocked on my door with an expression that suggested he was about to deliver bad news. "What is it?" I asked, setting aside the deposition I'd been reviewing. "There's a courier here with documents that need your immediate signature." He hesitated. "They're from Hargrove and Associates." My stomach dropped. Hargrove and Associates was the firm where Vanessa worked as a senior partner. "Send them in." The courier handed me a large manila envelope without meeting my eyes. Inside was a stack of legal documents with a post-it note in my sister's elegant handwriting. "Thought you should have these. The apartment is rightfully yours. V." The documents were transfer papers for Ryan's share of our apartment. We'd bought it together 2 years ago, both names on the deed, both responsible for the mortgage. Now Vanessa had drawn up papers transferring his ownership to me, with his signature already in place. The gesture wasn't kindness, it was calculation. Vanessa was cleaning up loose ends, making the transition smoother while positioning herself as reasonable and fair. The fact that she'd had Ryan sign over his half of the apartment confirmed they'd been planning this for longer than I'd initially suspected. Real estate transfers weren't drawn up overnight. I signed the papers mechanically, handed them back to the courier, and then sat motionless at my desk for nearly 20 minutes. It wasn't grief that paralyzed me. It was cold, clarifying. Rage? My sister hadn't just taken my fiancé. She'd orchestrated a complete takeover of my life, coolly planning each step while smiling at me across family dinners. That evening, I drove to my parents' home, determined to confront my mother about her role in all of this. The lakeside property looked exactly as it always had: immaculate gardens, pristine white columns, and large windows reflecting the setting sun. I'd grown up in this house, yet it had never felt like a safe haven. My mother was in her study, reviewing financial documents with the same intense focus she'd applied to critiquing my life choices. She looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to practiced sympathy. "Natalie, darling, I was wondering when you'd come by." She removed her reading glasses and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Ryan told us what happened. Such a shame when relationships don't work out." "Is that what he told you?" I remained standing. "That our relationship didn't work out? Not that you convinced him my sister would make a better wife for his career ambitions?" Her expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around her glasses. "I simply pointed out what was already obvious to everyone but you. Ryan and Vanessa have similar goals, similar networks. They make sense together. And I don't make sense with the man I've loved for 6 years? Oh, Natalie." She sighed, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "Love is a lovely starting point, but marriage is about building a life together. Ryan needs someone who can advance his career, who understands the social obligations of a future judge." "And what makes you think I don't understand those obligations?" I challenged. "I'm a partner at Collins and Westfield now, the youngest in the firm's history." For a brief moment, surprise flickered across her face before she composed herself. "Collins and Westfield? When did that happen?" "The day I overheard you trying to convince Ryan to leave me for Vanessa. I came home early to share my news. I let the irony hang between us. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say?" "Well, that's..." Ah, congratulations, she offered, clearly recalculating. But Vanessa's connections are no better than mine now, I interrupted. In fact, Collins and Westfield represents 3 of the state Supreme Court justices. If Ryan was purely interested in advancing his judicial aspirations, he should have stayed with me. My mother stood up, moving around her desk with the diplomatic smile she reserved for difficult social situations. What's done is done, Natalie. They're engaged now. The wedding's been moved up to June. Surely you don't want to make this more uncomfortable than it already is. Engaged? The word felt like a physical blow. Just 1 week after ending our 6-year relationship, Ryan had proposed to my sister. At my venue? The deposit was already paid, my mother said practically. It would have been wasteful to lose it. I stared at her, finally seeing with perfect clarity the woman who had raised me. She had never viewed me as an individual with my own dreams and potential. I was simply a character in her social narrative, and if I wasn't playing my part correctly, I could be recast without a second thought. You know what the truly wasteful thing is, Mother? Having a daughter who becomes a partner at a prestigious law firm and not even seeing her value. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Don't expect me at the wedding. Don't be childish, Natalie, she called after me. Family appearances matter. Think of what people will say if you're not there. I didn't respond. Her concern wasn't for my feelings, but for how my absence would reflect on the family image. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Can we talk? Coffee tomorrow? I didn't reply, but the next morning found me at Harborview Cafe, a neutral location far from our usual haunts. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, dressed in an expensive suit that highlighted her calculated elegance. We'd always been physical. Opposites, her tall and willowy, me shorter with curves. Differences my mother had never failed to point out. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. I didn't think you would. Professional curiosity, I replied coldly. I wanted to see how you'd justify your actions. She had the grace to look uncomfortable, at least. I know this seems terrible from your perspective. Seems terrible? I interrupted. You stole my fiancé and my wedding venue in a calculated move that apparently had our mother's blessing. In what universe is that not objectively terrible? Ryan and I didn't plan this, she insisted, echoing his words from a week earlier. We grew close while working on the Donovan case together. Things just evolved. Things don't just evolve into stealing your sister's future husband, I countered. They evolve through deliberate choices, like having secret coffee meetings, like changing wedding venue reservations behind my back, like listening to our mother's manipulations. Vanessa leaned forward. Mother had nothing to do with... I heard her, Vanessa. I was there the day she told Ryan you would be better for his career. I kept my voice low but intense. I heard every word. She paled slightly. That was her idea, not mine. And yet you didn't discourage it. You didn't tell her it was wrong. You didn't respect the relationship I had built over 6 years. I stirred my untouched coffee. Tell me, was the prenuptial agreement your idea or hers? Vanessa's sharp intake of breath told me everything. How do you know about that? I know more than you think, I bluffed, filing away this new information. Do you really believe Ryan loves you? Or does he love what you represent? The connections? The prestige? The path to judgeship? That's not fair, she protested. We have a genuine connection. Like we did? Before you decided your connection mattered more than sisterhood? I stood up, placing enough cash on the table to cover both our drinks. I hope you're happy together. I truly do. But don't expect me to attend the ceremony or pretend this is anything other than what it is, a calculated career move disguised as a love match. As I walked away, Vanessa called after me. The prenup is standard for someone with my assets, Natalie. It doesn't mean anything about our relationship. I didn't turn back, but her words echoed in my mind. A prenuptial agreement. Of course, they would have one, with Vanessa's careful planning and substantial assets. And now I knew of its existence. A small but potentially significant piece of information that might prove useful someday. The weeks following my confrontation with Vanessa passed in a blur of work and emotional numbness. I threw myself into my new role as partner, staying at the office until midnight most days and working through weekends. My colleagues attributed my dedication to ambition. Only Diane knew it was a desperate attempt to avoid the empty silence of my apartment and the thoughts that came with it. 3 weeks after Ryan moved out, a manila envelope arrived at my office. Inside was an elegant ivory card, a wedding invitation. Vanessa and Ryan cordially requested my presence at their ceremony at Willow Creek Estate on June 18th, just 2 months away. The date had originally been picked by Ryan and me for our fall wedding, but they'd moved it up considerably. A handwritten note from my mother was attached. Your presence is expected. Family comes first. I stared at the invitation, torn between laughter and tears at the sheer audacity. They were inviting me to watch them get married at what was supposed to be my wedding, as if I could simply put aside the betrayal and smile for family photographs. I dropped the invitation into my desk drawer and tried to focus on the brief. I'd been drafting, but the words blurred before my eyes. My office phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Ms. Patterson, this is Caroline from the Willow Creek Estate. I have a question about the wedding preparations. I think you've got the wrong Patterson, I said tightly. You should be speaking with my sister. Oh, I know Ms. Vanessa is handling most arrangements, Caroline said cheerfully. But she mentioned you're managing the legal paperwork for the day of documents? The prenuptial agreement and other signatures needed before the ceremony? I froze, my mind racing. Yes, that's correct. Sorry for the confusion. No problem. We just need to know what time you'll need the private signing room ready. Typically, we schedule it 2 hours before the ceremony, but Ms. Vanessa thought you might want it earlier. Earlier would be better, I agreed, improvising rapidly. 3 hours before, if possible. Some of these documents can be time-consuming. Perfect. I'll make a note of that. And will you need anything special for the signing? We usually provide champagne for toast after signatures. Just privacy and good lighting, I replied. These are confidential legal matters. After ending the call, I sat motionless, processing what had just happened. My sister had apparently told the venue I was handling their prenuptial agreement, likely to avoid questions about why another lawyer was involved. She hadn't bothered to tell me about this fabrication, probably assuming I wouldn't attend the wedding anyway. It was a careless mistake on her part. Vanessa was usually meticulous about details, but in her haste to secure the venue and expedite the wedding, she'd created an opening. I now had legitimate access to their prenuptial agreement, a document that could potentially reveal much about the true nature of their relationship. That evening, I finally opened the invitation drawer and studied it more carefully. Attending their wedding would be painful, but it might also provide information I couldn't access any other way. What exactly was in that prenup? What provisions had my calculating sister included? What had Ryan agreed to in his rush to secure his ambitious future? I called my mother that evening. I'll be at the wedding, I said without preamble when she answered. Well, of course you will, she replied, as if my attendance had never been in question. Your sister wants you to be a bridesmaid. I nearly choked. That's not happening. But the photos. I'll attend as a guest, Mother. Nothing more. My tone left no room for negotiation. And I'd appreciate if you'd inform Vanessa that I'll need access to their legal documents before the ceremony, as the venue seems to believe I'm handling them. There was a pause. What legal documents? Ask Vanessa, I replied coolly. She's apparently been using my name. 2 days later, Vanessa appeared at my office without an appointment. Miguel tried to intercept her, but she brushed past him with the entitlement of someone accustomed to getting her way. "What exactly are you playing at?" she demanded, closing my office door with controlled force. I looked up from my computer with deliberate calm. "You'll need to be more specific." "You know exactly what I mean. You told Mother you're handling our prenup at the wedding. That's a lie." "No, that's what you told the venue. I simply didn't correct their assumption." I leaned back in my chair. "Careless of you, really. Using my name without checking with me first." Vanessa paled slightly, then recovered. "It was a miscommunication. The wedding planner misunderstood." "Did she?" "When she specifically mentioned I'd be handling the day of documents and prenuptial agreement?" I raised an eyebrow. Those seem like very specific terms for a miscommunication. "Fine." Vanessa dropped into the chair across from my desk. "I needed to handle things quickly, and using your name avoided questions. It was wrong. I apologize." "Apology accepted," I said mildly, watching her relax slightly before continuing. "Of course, now the venue expects me to handle these documents in a private room before the ceremony. Rather awkward to explain why that won't be happening. I'll have our lawyer at Hargrove handle it. I'll tell the venue there was a change of plans." "You could," I agreed. "But that might raise questions. People talk, especially at high-profile weddings. Wouldn't it be simpler to let me handle it as planned? I am a partner at a prestigious firm now, completely qualified." Vanessa stared at me with suspicion. "Why would you want to help us?" "Not help, work." I met her gaze steadily. "I'll review your prenup as a professional courtesy. Make sure everything is properly executed on the day. It's what the venue expects." "You expect me to let my jilted sister handle my prenuptial agreement?" She laughed incredulously. "I expect you to let a partner at Collins and Westfield ensure your legal documents are properly executed," I corrected. "Unless you'd prefer to explain to your wedding planner, the venue staff, and potentially your guests why there's been a last-minute change to the signing arrangements." I watched the calculation in her eyes, weighing social embarrassment against giving me access to their documents. Vanessa had always prioritized appearances. "Fine," she finally agreed. "But I want to be clear. You'll be reviewing previously prepared documents, not drafting or advising." "Of course," I replied smoothly. "I wouldn't dream of interfering with whatever arrangements you and Ryan have made." After she left, I sat back and considered what I'd just accomplished. I now had legitimate access to their prenuptial agreement, a legally binding document that would reveal exactly what each of them was bringing to the marriage and under what terms. If Ryan was marrying Vanessa for her connections and career advantages, the prenup would reflect that in some way. The question was, what would I do with that information once I had it? The answer came a week later at a Collins and Westfield partners meeting. Gerald Westfield himself was discussing a high-profile divorce case the firm had recently handled. The prenup was airtight, he explained, except for one critical clause. If either party committed fraud in the inducement of marriage, deliberately hiding or misrepresenting material facts that would have affected the other's decision to marry, the entire agreement could be invalidated. My attention sharpened. "What constitutes fraud in the inducement?" I asked. "Various things," Gerald replied. "Hiding children from a previous relationship, concealing significant debt, lying about health conditions. The key is materiality. Would the information have changed the person's decision to marry if they'd known?" "What about hiding the true motivation for marriage?" I pressed. "For instance, if someone married purely for social or career advancement while pretending it was for love?" Gerald chuckled. "Difficult to prove, but theoretically possible. If you could demonstrate that one party made explicit promises or representations about their feelings that were provably false, and the other party relied on those representations in agreeing to marry, well, that might constitute fraud. The idea crystallized in my mind over the following days. If Ryan had made explicit promises or representations to Vanessa about his feelings for her, promises that could be proven false, it could potentially invalidate their prenup. And if their prenup were invalidated during their wedding ceremony, in front of all their carefully cultivated social connections. I wasn't seeking revenge exactly, but justice, a public acknowledgement of the calculated nature of their relationship that seemed worth pursuing. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made a decision that would change everything. I contacted an investigator who occasionally worked with our firm on complex divorce cases. I need everything you can find on Ryan Bennett's communications over the past 6 months, I explained. Emails, texts, recorded conversations, anything that might indicate his true motivations for his upcoming marriage. That's a broad request, the investigator noted. Any specific areas to focus on? Career advancement, I replied, particularly communications about judicial aspirations and how his choice of spouse might affect those aspirations. It was a gamble, but one worth taking. If Ryan had been explicit about his motivations with anyone, colleagues, friends, mentors, those communications would be powerful evidence of fraud. And if the investigator found nothing, I'd simply review the prenup professionally as agreed, swallow my pride, and watch my sister marry my ex-fiancé. But deep down, I knew Ryan. His ambition had always been his driving force, carefully concealed beneath charm and apparent devotion. If there was evidence to find, my investigator would find it. And then I would have a choice to make. Let the wedding proceed without incident, or bring their prenup to the ceremony in a way they never anticipated. The investigator's findings exceeded my wildest expectations. 1 week before the wedding, he delivered a thick file folder to my office after hours, ensuring no one else saw the exchange. "You hit the jackpot," he said, placing the folder on my desk with a significant look. "I've been doing this for 15 years and I've rarely seen someone document their own duplicity so thoroughly." After he left, I locked my office door and began reviewing the contents. There were printouts of emails, text message logs, transcripts of recorded conversations, and even handwritten notes, all meticulously organized and annotated. The most damning evidence came from Ryan's communications with his mentor, Judge William Harrison, a man he'd clerked for during law school. In an email dated just 2 days after I'd confronted him about his relationship with Vanessa, Ryan had written, "The transition has been smoother than expected. Natalie took it hard, of course, but maintained her typical composure. Vanessa and I are accelerating our timeline. The wedding is set for June at Willow Creek. Her connections to the Hamilton family alone make this a strategic alignment that should position me perfectly for the judicial appointment next year. Between her family's influence and her firm's client list, my path is now clear." Judge Harrison's response was equally revealing. A calculated risk, but potentially a wise one. Natalie would have been a solid partner, but Vanessa brings the right family legacy and connections that the committee values. Just ensure she believes this is about more than advancement. Women, even ambitious ones, prefer to think love is the primary motivation. My hands shook as I read their clinical dissection of my relationship and Vanessa's utility. In another email to a law school friend, Ryan had written, "The prenup negotiations have been intense. Her assets far exceed mine, but I've secured provisions that protect my future earnings as a judge." Had to play the devoted fiancé card heavily to get her to concede on certain points. Small price to pay for what this marriage will deliver professionally. The evidence continued, page after page of Ryan discussing his strategic alliance with various confidants, always emphasizing the career benefits while minimizing any emotional attachment. In text messages to his brother, he'd been even more blunt. "Mom keeps asking if I'm in love with Vanessa. Easier to say yes than explain it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. She gets the husband with judge potential her mother always wanted. For her, I get the connections I need for appointment. Win-win. I sat back, emotions warring within me. The validation of knowing I hadn't imagined his calculated betrayal was satisfying, but the cold reality of how Ryan viewed relationships, how he'd viewed ours, was still painful. What surprised me most was the evidence that Vanessa might be unaware of Ryan's true motivations. In numerous communications, he referenced making her believe his feelings were genuine and playing the devoted fiancé. Could my calculating sister actually be the one being manipulated this time? The question of what to do with this information consumed me over the next few days. I could send the file anonymously to Vanessa, but there was no guarantee she would believe it, or that she wouldn't dismiss it as a desperate attempt by me to sabotage her wedding. I could confront Ryan directly, but he would simply deny everything and alert Vanessa to my investigation. The most effective option remained my original plan. Use the prenuptial agreement signing as the moment to reveal the truth. But now, I had to decide how far I was willing to go. Did Vanessa deserve to know the truth, even if it humiliated her on her wedding day? Did I want to be the one to deliver that blow? 3 days before the wedding, Vanessa's law firm delivered the prenuptial agreement to my office for review, as we'd arranged. The document was extensive, over 40 pages of legal provisions detailing their respective assets, future earnings, and conditions for dissolution. As I'd suspected, Vanessa was bringing significantly more wealth to the marriage. Her family money, partnership at Hargrove, and investment portfolio dwarfed Ryan's assets. The prenup protected her considerably, with Ryan receiving only modest provisions in the event of divorce. What caught my attention was the fraud clause on page 28. This agreement shall be voidable by either party if it is determined that the other party fraudulently induced the marriage by deliberately concealing or misrepresenting material facts that would have reasonably affected the decision to enter into the marriage. The clause was standard language, but in light of the investigators' findings, it was the key to everything. Ryan had clearly misrepresented his motivations for marrying Vanessa, stating in writing to multiple people that it was a strategic alliance and mutually beneficial arrangement, while presumably telling her he loved her. I drafted a simple addendum to the prenuptial agreement, a single page affirming that both parties were entering the marriage in good faith, based on mutual love and affection rather than professional or financial advantage. It was innocuous, enough that neither of them would question it, but would strengthen the fraud clause substantially if Ryan signed it, while evidence to the contrary existed. The day before the wedding, I met with Diane for lunch, needing the perspective of someone who knew me well. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked after I explained my plan, careful to exclude any details that would violate client confidentiality. Exposing Ryan means humiliating Vanessa too. Is that what you really want? I'm not sure of anything, I admitted. Part of me wants to show them both exactly what kind of man he is. But another part wonders if Vanessa deserves to know the truth, regardless of how she'll feel about me revealing it. Or option 3, Diane suggested. You say nothing, sign their papers, and let them live with the choices they've made. Maybe that's the best revenge, walking away completely and building your own life. That's the rational choice, I agreed. But this isn't just about revenge, it's about... I struggled to articulate the feeling that had been growing within me since discovering Ryan's emails. Justice, Diane offered. Clarity, I corrected. For 6 years, I believed Ryan loved me. Then for weeks, I believed he'd left me because he loved Vanessa more. Now I know he's incapable of that kind of love at all. It's all calculation. Doesn't Vanessa deserve that clarity too, even if it comes at a painful moment? Diane studied me thoughtfully. Just be honest with yourself about your motivations. Are you doing this for Vanessa or for yourself? The question stayed with me through the rehearsal dinner that evening, which I deliberately skipped, claiming work obligations. Instead, I sat in my apartment with the prenuptial agreement and the file of evidence spread across my dining table, making final preparations for the next day. I carefully selected the key documents that most clearly demonstrated Ryan's deception, making copies that I placed in a separate folder. I drafted a brief cover letter explaining what the documents revealed and how they related to the fraud clause in the prenup. Then I prepared the addendum for them to sign, the seemingly innocent page that would tie everything together. By midnight, everything was ready. I placed the original prenup, my addendum, and the folder of evidence in my briefcase, then tried to sleep. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of months of betrayal, investigation, and careful planning. I still wasn't entirely sure what I would do when the moment came, but I was prepared for all possibilities. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day at Willow Creek Estate. I arrived 3 hours before the ceremony as arranged, dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected professional competence rather than wedding guest frivolity. Caroline, the venue coordinator, greeted me and led me to the private signing room, a wood-paneled library with leaded glass windows overlooking the estate's gardens. "Ms. Vanessa and Mr. Bennett should be here shortly," she informed me. "Can I get you anything while you wait? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine," I replied, setting up my materials on the ornate desk that dominated one end of the room. I arranged the prenuptial agreement and signing pages neatly in the center, keeping the folder of evidence in my briefcase for now. The minutes ticked by slowly as I stood at the window, watching the venue staff arranging chairs for the ceremony. The garden where Ryan and Vanessa would exchange vows was the same spot where he had once promised me we would begin our life together. Now I was preparing to potentially end their marriage before it even began. The door opened, and I turned to see Ryan entering, dressed in his morning suit, looking every inch the successful attorney on his way to becoming a judge. He faltered slightly upon seeing me, as if he'd somehow forgotten I would be there despite the arrangements. "Natalie," he said, regaining his composure. "Thank you for doing this. It's professional of you." "Just fulfilling my obligations," I replied evenly. "Where's Vanessa?" "Finishing up with her makeup. She'll be here shortly." He approached the desk, glancing at the papers. "Is everything in order?" "Almost," I said, watching him carefully. "There's just a standard affirmation addendum to sign. Nothing substantial, just confirming the representations you've both made are truthful and in good faith." He nodded, seemingly relieved by the simplicity. "Of course." We stood in uncomfortable silence until Vanessa arrived 5 minutes later, resplendent in a silk robe over her undergarments, her hair and makeup already completed for the ceremony. "Let's get this done quickly," she said, barely acknowledging me. "The photographer wants to start the pre-ceremony shots in 40 minutes. "It shouldn't take long," I assured her, gesturing to the chairs at the desk. "Please, both of you, have a seat." As they settled in, I remained standing, suddenly acutely aware that I stood at a crossroads. The folder of evidence sat in my briefcase, waiting. All it would take was one motion to pull it out, to place Ryan's duplicity on the table between them. In that moment, I would transform from facilitator to destroyer. I looked at my sister, the woman who had betrayed me without hesitation, yet who might now be the one being betrayed. I looked at Ryan, the man I had loved, who had proven himself incapable of genuine love in return, and I made my decision. "Before we proceed with the signing," I said calmly, "I should explain what you're about to sign." Ryan shifted impatiently. "We've already reviewed the prenup with our respective counsel, Natalie. This is just a formality." "The prenuptial agreement, yes," I agreed. "But I've added a standard addendum that requires special attention." I handed each of them a copy of the single page I'd prepared. "This document affirms that you're both entering this marriage in good faith, based on mutual love and affection rather than any professional or financial advantage." Vanessa skimmed it quickly, her brow furrowing slightly. "This seems unnecessary. The prenup already covers our financial arrangements. It's a formality, I explained, but an important one. It strengthens the fraud clause on page 28. I turned to that section in the main document, pointing it out to them. This protects both of you from entering a marriage under false pretenses. Ryan's expression remained neutral, but I noticed a slight tension around his eyes. Again, this seems redundant. Perhaps, I conceded. But recent cases have established that explicit affirmations of good faith can be crucial if questions ever arise about the validity of the prenup. I was improvising legal justification, but with enough technical language to sound plausible. It's standard practice at Collins and Westfield now. Vanessa nodded, seemingly satisfied with the explanation. Fine, let's sign and move on. Ryan hesitated, studying the addendum more carefully. I'm not sure this is necessary. It's a single page, Ryan, Vanessa interrupted, clearly annoyed by the delay. Just sign it so we can get back to the wedding preparations. I watched him carefully, seeing the calculation in his eyes. Refusing to sign would raise suspicions with Vanessa, while signing a document that contradicted his private communications created legal vulnerability. It was the perfect trap. After a moment, he reached for a pen. Of course. One moment, I said, reaching into my briefcase. The room seemed to still as I pulled out. Not the folder of evidence, but a legal pad, and another copy of the prenup for reference. Let me just confirm a few details first to ensure everything is properly prepared. The tension in Ryan's shoulders eased slightly as I referenced various sections of the prenup, asking clarifying questions about assets and future earnings. He answered confidently, clearly relieved that I wasn't about to create a scene. After several minutes of this, I returned to the addendum. So, just to be absolutely clear for the record, you're both affirming that you're entering this marriage based on mutual love and affection, not for any professional advantage or social advancement? Yes, Vanessa said firmly. Ryan nodded. Of course. I looked directly at Ryan. And there have been no misrepresentations about your motivations for this marriage? No communications with others characterizing it as a strategic alliance or mutually beneficial arrangement? His face paled slightly. What? No, of course not. I held his gaze steadily. No emails to Judge Harrison discussing how Vanessa's connections to the Hamilton family make this a strategic alignment for your judicial appointment? No texts to your brother explaining that it's easier to say you're in love than to explain it's a mutually beneficial arrangement? The room went utterly silent. Ryan's expression froze while Vanessa's head snapped toward him, her eyes widening. What is she talking about, Ryan? She demanded. I don't know. He stammered, shooting me a venomous look. Natalie's clearly making things up. I have copies of every communication, I said quietly, still not reaching for the evidence folder. Emails, texts, recorded conversations, all documenting your true motivations for this marriage. You've been quite explicit with numerous people about using Vanessa's connections for your judicial aspirations. That's absurd, Ryan sputtered, but his face had gone ashen. Vanessa stood abruptly. Show me. For a long moment, I hesitated. This was the point of no return. Once I showed her those documents, there would be no taking it back, no way to undo the humiliation she would feel, the wedding that would almost certainly be canceled, the social fallout that would follow. Natalie, Ryan said, his voice low and threatening, if you're doing this out of some misguided sense of revenge. This isn't about revenge, I interrupted, making my final decision. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the folder, placing it on the table between them. This is about truth, something you've never valued, Ryan. Vanessa snatched up the folder, opening it with trembling hands. Her face remained composed as she read the first email, but her complexion grew increasingly pale with each document she examined. These could be fabricated, Ryan tried, but his protest sounded hollow even to my ears. They're not, I said, calmly. The investigator who obtained them has provided chain of custody documentation. Every source is verified. Your email and phone records could be subpoenaed to confirm their authenticity. Vanessa looked up from the documents, her expression ice cold. A strategic alignment? Is that what this has been? Vanessa, you have to understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, she cut him off. You've been playing the devoted fiancé card heavily, according to this email to your friend. That explains a lot about your sudden interest in me after years of barely acknowledging my existence. She turned to me, her expression complex. Why are you doing this? Why today? At our wedding? The question was fair. I took a deep breath. Because you deserve to know who you're marrying. Despite everything, you're my sister. I wouldn't let you walk into a fraud, even if you did the same to me. How noble, she said sarcastically, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes changing. She was reassessing everything, not just Ryan, but me as well. You could have sent these anonymously. You didn't have to be here to witness the humiliation. I needed to ensure you saw them, I replied honestly. If I'd sent them anonymously, you might have dismissed them as a malicious prank. And I needed to see Ryan's face when he was finally confronted with his own words. Ryan stood up, his lawyer's instincts finally kicking in. This is inappropriate and unprofessional. You've clearly violated numerous privacy laws to obtain these documents. I could have your law license for this. You could try, I acknowledged. But then these documents would become part of the public record. Every text describing your mutually beneficial arrangement would be available for the Judicial Appointment Committee to review. I smiled thinly. Is that really the outcome you want? The color drained further from his face as he realized the trap he was in. Any action against me would only spread the very information he needed to keep private. Vanessa placed the folder down carefully, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. I think you should leave, Ryan. Vanessa, we can discuss this. There's nothing to discuss. Her voice was deadly calm. You leveraged our mother's manipulation to position yourself with my family for career advancement. You've been explicitly documenting your duplicity for months. You even had the audacity to brag about it. She removed her engagement ring, placing it on top of the documents. The wedding is off. You can't be serious, he protested. Think about the guests, your family's reputation. My family will recover, she said coldly. Your judicial aspirations, however, might not. Now get out before I decide to share these documents with everyone waiting in the garden. Ryan looked from Vanessa to me, his face contorted with barely controlled rage. You'll regret this, he said to me, his voice low. Both of you. No, I replied calmly. I don't think we will. After he stormed out, Vanessa and I were left alone in the room, an awkward silence stretching between us. I began gathering the documents, returning them to my briefcase. I should go tell the guests, she said finally. What will you tell them? I asked. The truth. A sanitized version, at least. She managed a brittle laugh. That irreconcilable differences came to light at the last moment. I nodded, continuing to collect my things. I wasn't sure what else to say. Despite the vindication of exposing Ryan, I took no joy in Vanessa's humiliation or pain. Why did you do it? She asked suddenly. Really? Was it revenge for what I did to you? I paused, considering the question seriously. No, I said finally. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. For 6 years, I believed Ryan loved me. Then I believed he loved you more. Now we both know he's incapable of that kind of love. It's all calculation for him. You deserve to know that before legally binding yourself to him. Vanessa studied me for a long moment. I would have done it differently if our positions were reversed, she said finally. I would have let you marry him, then held the knowledge over both of you for leverage. She smiled faintly. But then, you were always the better person. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or an observation of weakness in her eyes. With Vanessa, it could be both. I should go, I said, closing my briefcase. You have guests? To address, and I'd only complicate things by being seen. Yes, she agreed. That would be best. I headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it happened this way. She looked at me with an inscrutable expression. Are you? Really? I considered the question. I'm sorry for your public humiliation today. I'm not sorry you discovered the truth about Ryan before marrying him. Fair enough. She straightened her shoulders, already visibly rebuilding her composure. Mother will be devastated. This will completely disrupt her social calendar. Despite everything, I found myself smiling slightly at the typical Vanessa response. I'm sure she'll adapt. As I left through a side entrance to avoid the gathering wedding guests, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because of Vanessa's pain or Ryan's exposure, but because I'd finally broken free of the doubt and confusion that had plagued me since overhearing that conversation in my parents' kitchen. In the parking lot, I called Diane. It's done, I said when she answered. Did you go through with it? She asked. Yes, I replied. The wedding's off. Ryan's been exposed. How do you feel? I considered the question as I started my car. Lighter, clearer, ready to begin. Something new. Come over, she suggested. We'll open some wine and you can tell me everything. Not tonight, I said, surprising myself with the decision. I think I need to get away for a while, clear my head, figure out what's next. Where will you go? I hadn't consciously made a plan, but as she asked, I knew the answer. Remember, that beach house rental we looked at last summer in Sea Pines? The one with the writing desk overlooking the ocean? The one you said you'd rent someday when you had time to finish your novel? That's the one, I confirmed, smiling at the memory. 6 years ago, before law school consumed my life, I'd been working on a legal thriller. Ryan had gently but persistently suggested I focus on my real career instead of a hobby. I'd put the manuscript away and never looked back. I'm going to rent it for the summer, I decided. Take a leave from the firm. Finish my book. Just like that? Diane sounded surprised but pleased. Just like that, I confirmed. Life's too short to let other people dictate your choices. I learned that the hard way. As I drove away from Willow Creek Estate, away from the life I'd thought I wanted, the man I'd thought I loved, the family that had never truly valued me, I felt an unexpected sense of freedom. The future stretched before me, unwritten and full of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider. For the first time in years, I was making choices solely for myself, not to meet others' expectations or to prove my worth to anyone. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had no idea what would happen with Vanessa or my mother in the long term. Those relationships might be permanently altered or even severed by today's events. But whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, with clarity about who I was and what I truly wanted. The prenup I'd brought to the ceremony hadn't just ended a fraudulent marriage before it began, it had freed me from the prison of others' expectations. And that, I realized, was the most valuable outcome of all. The beach house in Sea Pines was exactly as I remembered. A weathered cedar-shingled cottage perched on a small dune, with windows overlooking the Atlantic and a wraparound deck that caught the morning sun. I'd booked it for 3 months, longer than I'd ever taken off work, using a significant portion of my savings. Gerald Westfield had been surprisingly understanding when I'd requested the leave of absence. Burnout hits the best of us, he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair during our meeting the Monday after the wedding debacle. Take the time you need. We can redistribute your cases. I didn't correct his assumption about burnout. It was simpler than explaining the tangled web of betrayal, investigation, and disrupted wedding that had led to my sudden need for distance. The first week at the beach house passed in a blur of sleep and walks along the shore, my mind gradually unwinding from the constant tension I'd been carrying for months. I retrieved my old manuscript from a cloud storage account where it had sat untouched for years, reading through chapters I barely remembered writing. The story followed a female prosecutor tracking a sophisticated white-collar criminal who manipulated the legal system with the same ease Ryan had manipulated my emotions. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the second week, I'd established a routine. Writing in the mornings while my mind was fresh, walking the beach in the afternoons, then editing in the evenings with a glass of wine on the deck. The manuscript was rough but showed promise. I could see why I'd been excited about it years ago, before I'd let Ryan's subtle criticism convince me it was a frivolous pursuit. I was deep in the process of restructuring a complicated trial scene one afternoon when someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting visitors. I'd told no one but Diane and my office where I was staying. When I opened the door, I found a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair and keen blue eyes standing on my porch, holding a book in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "You're the new tenant," she said, her voice warm but direct. "I'm Eliza Morgan. I own the place next." She gestured to a similar cottage about 100 yards down the beach. "Natalie Patterson," I replied, extending my hand. "Nice to meet you." "I bring gifts to newcomers," she said, handing me both items. "Local wine and my latest. Strictly optional whether you drink or read either." I glanced at the book, a legal thriller with Eliza's name emblazoned across the cover. I looked back at her with sudden recognition. "Eliza Morgan? The Eliza Morgan who writes the Kate Calloway series?" I asked, surprised. Her books had been bestsellers for years, following a brilliant defense attorney through increasingly complex cases. She smiled, seeming pleased at my recognition. "The very same. Though on the beach, I'm just the nosy neighbor who writes." "I've read all your books," I admitted. "They're what inspired me to start my own manuscript years ago." Her eyebrows rose with interest. "A fellow writer? Now I'm definitely intruding. Are you working on something now?" Before I knew it, I'd invited her in for coffee, and we were deep in conversation about writing, law, and the challenges of balancing both. Eliza had been a practicing attorney for 20 years before turning to writing full-time, and her insights were both practical and encouraging. "Most legal thrillers get the procedure all wrong," she observed as we sat on my deck. "But you're actually in the trenches. That authenticity is invaluable." "I've been away from my manuscript for years," I admitted. "Only recently decided to return to it." "What brought you back?" she asked, her head tilted curiously. I hesitated, unsure how much to share with this virtual stranger. But something about Eliza's direct gaze encouraged honesty. A reminder that I'd been living according to others' expectations rather than my own desires, I said carefully. A rather dramatic reminder, actually. "The best kind," she said with a knowing smile. "I left my law practice after my husband, of 15 years, announced he was leaving me for his much younger associate. Cliché, I know, but effective. I realized I'd been postponing my dream of writing for a partnership that never valued my full self. The parallel to my own situation was so striking that I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. "I can relate. Very much." "I suspected as much," she said. "There's a certain look people have when they're reclaiming their lives. A clarity in the eyes." She leaned forward. "If you're serious about your manuscript, I run a small workshop for writers here during the summer. Just 4 or 5 people, all working on book-length projects. We meet Tuesday evenings at my place. You're welcome to join." The invitation was unexpected, and exactly what I needed. A purpose beyond recovering from betrayal. A community beyond the one I'd left behind in Boston. I'd like that very much, I said. That evening marked the beginning of a transformative friendship. Eliza was 15 years my senior, but her perspective on both writing and life resonated deeply with me. She'd rebuilt her identity after betrayal, finding greater success and fulfillment than she'd ever known in her previous career. Over the weeks that followed, the Tuesday workshops became the anchor of my schedule. The group was small but diverse: a retired history professor working on a historical novel, a local journalist crafting a true crime narrative, and a young MFA graduate tackling her first literary fiction, all under Eliza's experienced guidance. Their feedback on my manuscript was invaluable, helping me tighten the plot and deepen the characters in ways I wouldn't have managed alone. But it was the private conversations with Eliza that truly shaped my thinking. We fell into a routine of sharing dinners twice a week, alternating between our cottages, discussing everything from legal procedurals to personal philosophies. The most important lesson I learned after David left, she told me one evening as we shared pasta on her deck, was that betrayal isn't just about loss. It's also about possibility. When someone removes themselves from your life, whether by choice or by revealing who they truly are, they create space for something better. I'm still processing the who they truly are part, I admitted, twirling spaghetti around my fork. I thought I knew Ryan completely after 6 years. I thought I understood my sister and mother too. But now you know them more truly, Eliza pointed out. That's valuable information, even if it hurts. I'm not sure what to do with that information yet, I said. I haven't spoken to any of them since the wedding day. My mother's called a dozen times, but I'm not ready for that conversation. You don't have to be, she assured me. Healing and clarity operate on their own timeline, not anyone else's expectations. By the halfway point of my stay, my manuscript had evolved from a simple legal procedural into something more complex. A story about a woman discovering her own strength while navigating both professional challenges and personal betrayals. The parallels to my life were obvious, but the fictionalized distance allowed me to process my experiences in a way direct confrontation couldn't. I was making notes on a particularly difficult chapter one afternoon when my phone rang with Diane's number. "How's the beach treating you?" she asked when I answered. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "The writing's going well and I've made some interesting friends." "Good. That's good." Her hesitation was unusual. Diane was typically straightforward. "What's wrong?" I asked, instantly alert. "Nothing's wrong exactly. It's just, Ryan's been making some noise at the courthouse." My stomach tightened. "What kind of noise?" "Nothing direct. He's been telling colleagues that you suffered some kind of breakdown, implying that's why you torpedoed your sister's wedding and then disappeared." I closed my eyes, breathing through the flash of anger. Of course Ryan would attempt to control the narrative, painting me as unstable rather than himself as manipulative. "Has it affected your standing at the firm?" I asked, concerned that my actions might have backfired on my career. "Not at all," Diane assured me. "Gerald Westfield actually shut down a gossiping associate who brought it up, telling them that your personal life is off limits for office discussion, but I thought you should know what you might be walking back into." "Thanks for the warning," I said. "Anything else I should know?" There was a pause. "Your mother came by the office looking for you last week. I told her you were on leave and unavailable." "Thank you," I said, grateful for her protection. "Did she say what she wanted?" "Just that it was a family matter that needed resolving." She seemed not exactly worried, but definitely thrown off balance. I could imagine my mother's discomfort. The carefully orchestrated social narrative she'd constructed, brilliant elder daughter advancing her career while beautiful younger daughter made an advantageous marriage, had completely collapsed. Her controlled world was in disarray, and she had no idea how to proceed without my cooperation in whatever new scenario she was planning. "She'll have to wait," I said firmly. "I'm not ready to re-engage with any of them yet." After hanging up with Diane, I took a long walk on the beach, turning over this new information. Ryan was attempting to discredit me, which meant he felt threatened by the truth I possessed. My mother was trying to re-establish contact, likely to negotiate some new arrangement that would salvage the family's social standing. What surprised me was how little either prospect bothered me now. 6 weeks of distance had given me perspective I couldn't have gained in Boston, surrounded by the debris of my former life. That evening at Eliza's workshop, I shared a newly revised chapter where my protagonist confronts a colleague who's been spreading rumors to undermine her credibility. "This rings very true," the retired professor commented. "The protagonist isn't just defending her reputation, she's asserting her right to define her own narrative." "Exactly," I agreed. "She's reclaiming control of her story." Eliza gave me a knowing look. "Something shifted for you," she observed after the others had left. "You're writing with more conviction." I told her about Ryan's attempts to paint me as unstable and my mother's efforts to re-establish contact. "And how do you feel about it?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. 6 weeks ago, I would have been furious, hurt, anxious about the professional implications. But now? It feels distant, like it's happening to someone else, someone I used to be but am not anymore. Eliza nodded approvingly. "That's what I meant about clarity in your eyes when we first met. You're no longer defining yourself in relation to them." "I'm not sure who I am defining myself as yet," I admitted. "That's the exciting part," she said, refilling our wine glasses. "You get to decide, maybe for the first time without others' expectations clouding your vision." The next morning, I woke with unprecedented clarity about my path forward. I'd been thinking of my time at Sea Pines as a temporary retreat, a pause before returning to my real life in Boston. But what if this was my real life? What if the path I'd been on, prestigious law career, marriage to a fellow lawyer, fulfilling my mother's expectations of success, had been the detour? I called Gerald Westfield that afternoon. "I've been considering my position at the firm," I told him, after exchanging pleasantries. "We're looking forward to your return," he said. "The Montgomery case in particular could use your expertise." "That's the thing," I said, taking a deep breath. "I'm not sure I will be returning, at least not in the same capacity." There was a pause. "I see. Is there another firm?" "Because we'd be willing to discuss partnership terms if that's the issue." "It's not about terms," I explained. "It's about direction. I'm exploring other avenues for my legal expertise, specifically writing." I outlined my manuscript's progress and mentioned Eliza's mentorship without explicitly naming her. To my surprise, Gerald didn't immediately try to dissuade me. "I won't pretend I'm not disappointed," he said finally. "You're one of our most promising associates, partner material without question. But I've seen too many brilliant lawyers burn out because they're on a path that doesn't truly engage them." We negotiated a compromise. I would take another 3 months leave, and if at the end of that time I still wanted to pursue writing, I could transition to consulting counsel status, maintaining a connection to the firm for specific cases while pursuing my new direction. "The door remains open," Gerald assured me. "Remember that." After hanging up, I sat on my deck watching the waves, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. I'd just voluntarily stepped away from the career I'd spent years building, the career that had been central to my identity and my measure of self-worth. Yet underneath the fear was a sense of rightness, of alignment with my true self, that I hadn't experienced in years. The next morning, I received an unexpected email from Eliza's literary agent, requesting the first 3 chapters of my manuscript. Eliza had apparently mentioned my project, and the agent was intrigued by the concept. "No pressure," Eliza assured me when I called her, slightly panicked. "She's just interested in seeing where you're headed. Think of it as professional feedback at this stage." The request gave new urgency to my revisions. I spent the next week refining those critical opening chapters, integrating the insights I'd gained through the workshop while maintaining my authentic voice. The day I sent the chapters to the agent, Eliza appeared on my doorstep with champagne. "This is what we call a milestone moment," she declared. "The first time you officially put your work into the professional pipeline. It deserves celebration regardless of what happens next." As we toasted on the deck, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink, I felt a profound sense of peace despite all the uncertainty ahead. "Thank you," I said suddenly, turning to Eliza. "Not just for the champagne or the workshop or the agent introduction. For showing me that there's life after betrayal, not just survival, but something richer and more authentic than what was lost." She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's the secret they don't tell you about rock bottom," she said. "It's actually the perfect foundation to build something new, something entirely of your own making." The future remained unwritten, filled with questions I couldn't yet answer. Would my manuscript find a publisher? Would I ever reconcile with my family? Would I return to Boston eventually, or make a new home elsewhere? But for the first time, those questions didn't fill me with anxiety. They were simply the next chapters in a story that had taken an unexpected but promising turn. A story where I was both the protagonist and the author, fully empowered to determine its direction. The prenup I'd brought to the ceremony had saved my sister from a marriage based on calculation rather than love. But more importantly, it had freed me to discover who I truly was beyond others' expectations. And that was a revelation worth every moment of pain that had preceded it. The agent's response came 2 weeks later, arriving in my inbox on a stormy afternoon that had confined me to the cottage. I'd been pacing nervously, checking my email every few minutes despite Eliza's assurances that literary agents often took months to respond. "Natalie," the email began, "I've finished reading your chapters and would like to discuss the project further. Are you available for a call tomorrow?" I stared at the screen, reading and rereading those simple sentences, trying to parse their meaning. It wasn't an enthusiastic declaration of love for my writing, but it wasn't a rejection either. I forwarded the email to Eliza with a simple subject line. "What does this mean?" Her response came minutes later. "It means she's interested. Don't overthink it. Say yes to the call." The conversation with Hannah Klein the next morning was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was direct but encouraging, asking pointed questions about my protagonist's motivations and the overall arc of the story. "Your legal background gives the procedural elements authenticity," she noted. "But what really caught my attention is your protagonist's internal journey. The parallels between her professional investigation and personal awakening create a compelling tension." She requested the full manuscript, warning me that it would likely need substantial revisions before being submission-ready. "But I see potential here," she concluded. Real potential. After the call, I sat on my deck in a state of stunned disbelief. A New York literary agent, a successful one, representing authors whose books I'd read and admired, saw potential in my work. In me. I called Eliza immediately. "Hannah Klein wants my full manuscript," I said without preamble. "I knew she would," Eliza replied, sounding utterly unsurprised. "When can you get it to her?" "That's the problem," I admitted. "It's not finished. I have about 60% drafted, but the ending still isn't clear to me." "Then you have work to do," she said simply. "Cancel any plans for the next few weeks. This is your moment to seize." For the next month, I lived and breathed my manuscript. I barely left the cottage except for quick walks to clear my head and Tuesday workshop sessions, which became entirely focused on my project. The group rallied around me with extraordinary generosity, reading chapters as I produced them, offering feedback within days rather than the usual week. Eliza became my daily sounding board, sometimes dropping by with coffee in the mornings just to discuss plot points I was struggling with. She never told me what to write, but her questions helped me clarify my own thinking about the story and characters. Your protagonist is at a crossroads here, she pointed out during one such discussion. She knows the truth about the villain, but exposing him will also expose her own complicity in the earlier cover-up. What matters more to her, justice or self-preservation? The question resonated beyond the page, echoing my own choices about Ryan and Vanessa. Had I exposed them for justice or for my own vindication? The parallel helped me write a pivotal scene where my protagonist chooses a painful truth over comfortable lies. As the manuscript neared completion, I found myself thinking more frequently about my family and the unresolved situation in Boston. I hadn't spoken to any of them since the wedding day, though my mother continued to leave occasional voicemails that I listened to, but didn't return. We need to discuss family matters. Her most recent message said, her voice controlled but strained. Your silence is only making things more difficult, Natalie. Vanessa is considering a position in California. We should resolve things before she leaves. I mentioned the voicemail to Eliza during one of our evening discussions. Are you ready? To talk to them, she asked, swirling wine in her glass. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to leave it all behind, start fresh without the weight of their expectations and disappointments. But another part wonders if that's just running away. There's a difference between running away and moving forward, Eliza observed. One is fear-driven, the other is purpose-driven. Which feels more true to you now? I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, it would have been running away. Now it feels more like moving towards something of my own choosing. Then timing matters, she said. You can engage with them from this position of strength and clarity, or you can wait until you've established even more solid footing. There's no rule that family reconciliations must happen on their timeline, rather than yours. Her words gave me permission to focus on my immediate priority, completing the manuscript. I finished the final chapter at 3 a.m. on a moonlit night, typing the last sentence with trembling fingers before stepping onto the deck to breathe in the salt air and process the strange emptiness that followed completion. The story ended with my protagonist exposing the white-collar criminal's elaborate fraud scheme, but also acknowledging her own role in initially overlooking warning signs. She loses her perfect professional reputation, but gains authentic self-respect and the foundation for a more honest future. I sent the completed manuscript to Hannah the next morning, then collapsed into exhausted sleep. When I woke in the late afternoon, I felt oddly disoriented, as if I'd been living in two worlds simultaneously and one had suddenly disappeared. Post-manuscript depression, Eliza diagnosed when I described the feeling over dinner that night. It's common. You've been living with these characters every day for months, and now they're gone. What's the cure? I asked. She smiled. Starting the next book helps. But in the meantime, reconnecting with the real world. Maybe it's time to think about what comes next for you, beyond the page. What came next arrived sooner than I expected. 3 days after submitting my manuscript, I received a call from Hannah. I stayed up all night reading it, she said without preamble. It needs work, tightening in the middle, strengthening your secondary characters, but the bones are excellent. I want to represent you. The words seemed to hang in the air as I struggled to process their meaning. You want to be my agent? Yes, she confirmed. I believe in this book and your potential as a writer. We'll need to spend a few months on revisions before submission to publishers, but I'm confident we can place this with the right editor. After I hung up, I sat on my deck in a state of disbelief. The dream I'd deferred for years, the one Ryan had dismissed as impractical, the one I'd set aside to pursue the sensible path, was suddenly, improbably coming true. I called Eliza first, then Diane, sharing the news with the two women who had supported me through the darkest and brightest moments of the past months. "I'm not surprised," Diane said warmly. "You've always been a powerful writer. Your legal briefs were practically literature." "What happens now?" I asked Hannah during our follow-up call the next day. "Now we refine the manuscript," she explained. "I'll send you detailed editorial notes next week. Once we've addressed those issues, we'll develop a submission strategy for publishers." "How long will all that take?" I asked, trying to plan my next steps. "Realistically, 3 to 4 months for revisions. Then the submission process itself can take anywhere from weeks to months. Publishing moves at its own pace." The timeline presented both a challenge and an opportunity. My second 3-month leave from the Sawi firm would be ending soon, forcing a decision about whether to return to Boston and my legal career or commit fully to this new path. That evening, I called Gerald Westfield to discuss my options. "Congratulations on securing representation," he said when I shared my news. "Though I can't say I'm entirely pleased to be losing one of our most promising attorneys to the publishing world." "I'm not sure you are losing me completely," I said carefully. "I've been thinking about the consulting counsel arrangement we discussed. Would it be possible to structure something where I primarily work remotely, coming to Boston only for specific cases or meetings?" "Remote work is becoming more common," he acknowledged. "We could certainly discuss arrangements. The Montgomery case in particular could benefit from your expertise, even in a limited capacity." We negotiated the details over the next week. I would maintain a connection to the firm as consulting counsel, handling select cases that aligned with my expertise and interests. The arrangement provided financial security while I navigated the uncertainties of publishing, as well as a connection to the profession I'd invested years in mastering. With my professional future taking shape, I finally felt ready to address the situation with my family. Rather than returning their calls, I sent a brief email to my mother. "I'm aware you've been trying to reach me. I've needed time and space to process everything that happened. I'm open to a conversation now, but on my terms. I suggest a video call this Friday at 2 p.m. if that works for you." Her response came within minutes. "Friday at 2 is fine. I appreciate your willingness to talk. Things have been difficult here." I prepared for the call with the same thoroughness I would have applied to a court appearance, outlining key points I wanted to make, anticipating her likely responses, and setting clear boundaries in my mind. Eliza offered to be nearby for moral support, but I knew this was a conversation I needed to handle alone. When my mother's face appeared on my screen that Friday, I was struck by how tired she looked. The perfectly maintained facade she typically presented to the world showed subtle cracks, a stray strand of hair, a slight puffiness around her eyes. "Natalie," she said, her voice carefully modulated, "you're looking well. The beach agrees with you." "I'm doing well," I confirmed, refusing to be drawn into superficial pleasantries. "You wanted to talk about family matters. What specifically did you want to discuss?" She sighed, momentarily dropping the polite mask. "Always direct. Very well. Vanessa has received an offer from a firm in San Francisco. She's considering taking it, a fresh start after the incident." The incident being her canceled wedding to my ex-fiancé who was only marrying her for career advancement, I clarified, keeping my tone neutral. My mother winced slightly. "Yes, that unfortunate situation." "And what does Vanessa's potential move have to do with me?" I asked. "We're family, Natalie," she said, as if explaining something obvious. "Despite everything that's happened, we should at least attempt reconciliation before she leaves. The current estrangement is challenging to explain in our social circle." Of course, her primary concern was managing appearances, not healing relationships. "I'm open to speaking with Vanessa if she wishes," I said carefully. "But I want to be clear, I'm not interested in superficial reconciliation for the sake of appearances. Any conversation would need to include honest acknowledgement of what happened." Your sister is still processing her humiliation, my mother said stiffly. Ryan's deception hurt her deeply. I'm aware, I replied. That's why I ensured she saw the evidence before marrying him. Yes, well? My mother cleared her throat. About your career, Gerald Westfield mentioned you're considering a change of direction. Something about writing? The abrupt change of subject didn't surprise me. My mother had always been skilled at steering conversations away from emotionally charged territory toward practical matters she felt more comfortable discussing. I've secured literary representation for my novel, I said simply. I'll be maintaining a connection with the firm as consulting counsel while pursuing publishing opportunities. Her expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, calculation. A novel, is that sustainable as a career? I'm creating the career I want, I replied firmly. One that honors all aspects of who I am, not just the ones that fit a predetermined mold. We spoke for another 20 minutes, carefully navigating around the deeper issues between us. She didn't apologize for her role in encouraging Ryan to leave me for Vanessa, and I didn't demand that she do so. Some reckonings would require more time and different circumstances. As we prepared to end the call, she hesitated, then said, Vanessa asked me to tell you that she appreciates what you did, preventing her from marrying someone who viewed her as a career stepping stone. She paused. It wasn't the way any of us would have chosen for the truth to come out, but she acknowledges it was the truth. It was the closest thing to gratitude, or reconciliation I was likely to get from either of them. I nodded acceptance of the message without commenting on it. I'll be in Boston next month for meetings at the firm, I said instead. We could have dinner if you'd like. I would, she replied, sounding genuinely pleased by the offer. Let me know when your schedule is finalized. After we disconnected, I walked to the beach and sat watching the waves, processing the conversation. The dynamic between us had shifted subtly but significantly. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I'd engaged with my mother as an equal, neither rebellious nor compliant, but simply clear about who I was and what I needed. I'd set boundaries without anger, extended an olive branch without capitulation, and maintained my authentic self throughout. It felt like the first step toward a potentially different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than control and expectation. That evening, as Eliza and I shared dinner, I recounted the conversation. It sounds like progress, she observed. Small steps, but in the right direction. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I once imagined, I admitted. No tearful apologies or stunning revelations, just a shift in understanding. Real life rarely provides the neat resolutions we create in fiction, Eliza said with a smile. But authentic change tends to happen in those small, undramatic moments. As the summer drew to a close, I faced practical decisions about where to live. My rental agreement at the beach house was ending, and while I loved Sea Pines, the winter season would transform the vibrant community into a quiet, sometimes isolated place. You could stay, you know, Eliza suggested as we walked along the shore one evening. I keep the cottage next door vacant most of the winter. You could rent it at a fraction of the summer rate. The offer was tempting. Sea Pines had become a place of healing and transformation for me. But as I considered my path forward, I realized I needed to engage with the wider world again, not retreat from it. I think I need to go back to Boston, I said finally. Not to return to my old life, but to build a new one that incorporates both what I've left behind and what I've discovered. Here. Integration rather than escape, Eliza nodded approvingly. That takes courage. The decision felt right. Boston held difficult memories, but also friendships, professional connections, and unfinished personal business that deserved proper closure. I could return on my own terms now, stronger, clearer, no longer defined by others' expectations or my relationship status. I found a small apartment in Cambridge, away from the downtown district where I'd lived with Ryan, but close enough to the firm for my consulting work. The space was entirely mine, decorated according to my preferences rather than compromise. Bookshelves lining the walls, a dedicated writing desk positioned near windows overlooking a tree-lined street, and absolutely no law books in the living areas. In early October, a week before I was scheduled to return to Boston, I received an unexpected email from Vanessa. The subject line was simply, "Thank you." "Natalie," she wrote, "I'm finalizing preparations for my move to San Francisco next month. Before I go, I wanted to acknowledge what you did for me at the wedding. While the timing and method were far from ideal, your actions saved me from a marriage based on calculation rather than genuine feeling. I've had months to reflect on this, and I can now say with clarity, thank you for having the courage I lacked. I also owe you an apology for my role in the situation with Ryan. Mother's machinations don't excuse my actions. I chose to pursue a relationship with your fiancé, knowing how much it would hurt you. I told myself it was just business, a strategic pairing, but that rationalization doesn't erase the betrayal. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope we might eventually rebuild some version of a relationship. We've never been close as sisters, but perhaps we could be something different going forward. Something honest, at least. If you're amenable, I'd like to see you when you're in Boston next week. Coffee, neutral ground, just to talk." The email stunned me. Vanessa had never been one for emotional honesty or acknowledging wrongdoing. Her calculating nature made genuine apologies practically foreign to her vocabulary. Yet here was something that felt surprisingly authentic. I showed the message to Eliza during our final dinner together before my departure. "Are you going to meet with her?" she asked after reading it. "I think so," I said, not with any expectation of suddenly becoming close sisters, but to close one chapter properly before beginning the next, she finished for me. "Exactly." I smiled, grateful once again for her understanding. Just as I'm doing with the firm, with my apartment, with the whole Boston chapter of my life. "Full circle," Eliza noted. "You're returning to face your past, but as someone entirely new." As I packed my belongings the next day, preparing to leave the beach house that had sheltered my transformation, I found myself filled not with anxiety about returning to Boston, but with a sense of purpose and completion. The prenup I'd brought to my sister's wedding had changed everything, not just for Vanessa and Ryan, but fundamentally for me. It had forced a reckoning that had ultimately freed all of us. Vanessa from a marriage based on calculation, Ryan from a path built on deception, and me from a life confined by others' expectations. The documents that should have bound them together had instead severed ties that needed breaking and created space for new possibilities. I placed the draft of my manuscript, now titled Fraudulent Intent, at Hannah's suggestion, carefully, in my carry-on bag. The story had begun as a simple legal thriller, but had evolved into something more complex, an exploration of betrayal, discovery, and reconstruction, just like my own journey. As I drove away from Sea Pines, I glanced in, my rearview mirror at the cottage that had sheltered my rebirth. The pain that had driven me there had transformed into something valuable: clarity, purpose, and the courage to write my own story, both on the page and in my life. The prenup I'd brought to the ceremony hadn't just prevented a fraudulent marriage. It had cleared the way for a more authentic existence for everyone involved. Most importantly, for me. Boston, in late October, greeted me with a brilliant display of fall colors, the familiar skyline now appearing different through my transformed perspective. As my cab wound through the city streets toward Cambridge, I studied the urban landscape, like a visitor seeing it for the first time rather than a returner to familiar territory. My new apartment was exactly as the property manager had described. A third-floor unit in a converted Victorian with high ceilings, abundant natural light, and the promised tree-lined view. Unlike the sleek downtown condo I'd shared with Ryan, this place had character: creaky wooden floors, ornate moldings, and built-in bookshelves perfect for my growing collection. I spent the first day unpacking and arranging my space, deliberately creating an environment that reflected who I had become rather than who I used to be. My writing desk commanded the bay window alcove, the manuscript revisions I was working on prominently displayed rather than hidden away like a shameful secret. The next morning, I met Diane for breakfast at our favorite cafe near the public garden. Her delighted hug and genuine enthusiasm for my return warmed me more than the coffee we shared. "You look different," she observed, studying me across the table. "More present, somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've finally figured out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants." "The writing is part of that?" she asked. I nodded. "A big part. But also the distance from everything. Space to figure out what matters to me, not what I thought should matter." "And now you're back to face it all again," she noted. "Are you nervous about seeing them?" "Less than I expected," I replied honestly. "I'm meeting Vanessa for coffee this afternoon, Mother for dinner tomorrow, even scheduled a consultation at the firm on Thursday." "The full gauntlet," Diane raised her eyebrows. "Brave woman." "Not brave," I corrected. "Just ready. These are all loose ends that need tying up before I can fully move forward." The coffee shop where I'd arranged to meet Vanessa was deliberately neutral territory, neither a place we'd frequented together nor anywhere associated with my former life with Ryan. I arrived early, selecting a quiet corner table with a view of the door, my defensive instinct still active enough to prefer watching her approach rather than being surprised. When she entered precisely at 3, I was struck by subtle changes in her appearance. Still elegantly dressed in a tailored pantsuit, her hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders rather than the mid-back length she'd maintained for years. She looked polished, but somehow less rigid, scanning the room with nervous energy rather than her usual calculated confidence. Her eyes found mine, and she approached with a tentative smile. Not the practiced social smile she'd perfected for professional settings, but something more uncertain. "Natalie," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "Thank you for meeting me. You look really well." "Thanks," I replied simply. "You too. The shorter hair suits you." Her hand went to the ends of her hair self-consciously. A change seemed appropriate, given everything else changing in my life. We ordered coffee, navigating awkward small talk about the weather and my new apartment until the server departed. Then Vanessa took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders in a gesture so familiar it brought an unexpected pang of recognition. The same posture adjustment she'd made before difficult cross-examinations in law school mock trials. "I meant what I said in my email," she began. "Thank you for what you did at the wedding. It was humiliating in the moment, but—" She paused, carefully choosing her words. "It saved me from a much longer, more painful humiliation." "Have you heard from Ryan since then?" I asked, curious despite myself. A flicker of something, anger perhaps, crossed her face. "He tried to reconnect about a month after the wedding, suggesting we talk things through. When I declined, he implied I was being hysterical about routine professional networking conversations." She shook her head, as if discussing how my family connections would advance his judicial aspirations was just normal career planning. "That sounds like Ryan," I observed dryly. "Always able to rationalize his behavior. I keep thinking about how long it might have taken me to discover the truth if you hadn't brought those documents," she said quietly. "Years, maybe. After I'd helped advance his career, introduced him to all my connections, invested everything in our partnership." She met my eyes. "Directly. You could have let it happen. Many people would have, for revenge." The observation hung between us, acknowledging the complicated truth at the heart of my actions. I could have stayed silent, letting Vanessa marry a man who viewed her as a career stepping stone, exacting a twisted revenge for her betrayal. That wouldn't have been justice, I said finally. Just another form of calculation. I didn't want to be that person. No, she agreed. You never were. That was always the difference between us. Mother called it your weakness, that you wouldn't play the game, wouldn't strategize relationships, but it's actually your strength. The acknowledgement, coming from Vanessa of all people, struck me deeply. For years, my mother and sister had viewed my straightforward nature as a liability, my unwillingness to trade relationships like social currency as a failure to understand how the world worked. Now Vanessa was reframing it as an asset. Why San Francisco? I asked, changing the subject to something less emotionally charged. A fresh start, she replied. An offer from Hayes and Thornton. They've been expanding their West Coast presence, but also, she hesitated, distance from Mother's influence, from the expectations I've been trying to live up to since childhood. I can understand that motivation, I said with unexpected sympathy. I've been thinking a lot about the dynamic between us growing up, Vanessa continued, rotating her coffee cup slowly between her hands. How Mother always positioned us as competitors rather than sisters. How I leaned into that, believing there was only room for one successful daughter. The golden child versus the disappointment, I said, naming the dynamic that had shaped our relationship for decades. Except you were never actually a disappointment, she acknowledged. You just refused to play by her rules. And that threatened both of us because it challenged the framework we operated within. The insight surprised me, not just for its accuracy, but for Vanessa's willingness to voice it. This level of self-awareness and honesty was something I'd never witnessed from my sister before. What changed? I asked. You've never been one for introspection. She smiled ruefully. Nearly marrying someone who valued me only for my strategic utility was quite the wake-up call. It made me reconsider a lot of my choices, personal and professional. She paused. I've been seeing a therapist. Mother would be horrified if she knew. The confession startled a laugh from me. Good for you. I did some therapy after law school. Mother found out and suggested I lacked the natural resilience of the Patterson women. God, that sounds exactly like her, Vanessa shook her head, always framing vulnerability as weakness. The conversation shifted into unexpectedly honest territory, comparing notes on our upbringing and the complicated legacy of our mother's values. For the first time, we spoke as equals rather than rivals, acknowledging the harmful patterns that had shaped us while recognizing our respective responsibilities in perpetuating them. I am truly sorry about Ryan, Vanessa said as our coffees cooled. Not just for the betrayal itself, but for how I rationalized it. I told myself you'd recover, find someone else, that it wasn't really hurting you because you'd be better off in the long run. She shook her head. The mental gymnastics were impressive, even to me. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, I replied honestly. It did, devastatingly. But in retrospect, you might have been right about one thing. I am better off now. You seem it, she agreed. I barely recognized you when you walked in, not physically, but energetically. You've changed. Sea Pines was transformative, I acknowledged, having space to reconnect with myself beyond relationships and career expectations. Mother mentioned something about writing? Vanessa asked, her tone carefully neutral. I nodded, deciding to share the full truth. I finished a novel. It's being revised now for submission to publishers. I've signed with a literary agent. Her eyebrows rose slightly. That's impressive. Fiction was always your strength, even in school. I remember that short story you wrote that won the state prize senior year. The memory surprised me. I'd forgotten that achievement myself, having long ago filed away creative, writing as an impractical pursuit. The fact that Vanessa remembered it, had perhaps even valued it, shifted something in my perception of our shared history. "What about you?" I asked. "Is the move to San Francisco purely professional, or are you exploring other changes too?" A slight flush colored her cheeks. "I've actually been taking photography classes, something I've been interested in since college but never pursued because it wasn't serious enough." The revelation of this hidden interest, one I'd never known about despite growing up in the same household, underscored how little we'd actually known each other beyond the competitive personas we'd projected. As we prepared to leave, Vanessa hesitated. "I don't expect us to suddenly become close sisters. Too much has happened for that kind of simple resolution. But maybe we could try something else, a relationship based on who we're becoming rather than who we were." The offer was tentative, genuine in a way I'd rarely experienced from her. I considered it seriously, weighing the potential value against the risk of further hurt. "I'd like to try," I said finally. Cautiously, honestly, with appropriate boundaries. "But yes, I'd like to know who you're becoming." Her smile held relief and something that looked almost like hope. "I'll email you when I'm settled in San Francisco. Maybe we can FaceTime occasionally." "I'd like that," I agreed, surprised to discover I meant it. Walking back to my apartment, I reflected on the unexpected outcome of our meeting. I'd anticipated formality, perhaps a carefully negotiated peace for the sake of family appearances. Instead, I'd glimpsed a Vanessa I barely recognized, self-aware, apologetic, actively working to change patterns she'd recognized as destructive. Whether this transformation would last remained to be seen. People could change fundamentally, as I had, but they could also revert to old patterns when convenient. Time would tell which path Vanessa would ultimately choose. The dinner with my mother the following evening proved less transformative but no less important for closure. We met at Sorellina, her favorite Italian restaurant downtown, where the muted lighting and excellent wine list encouraged the illusion of intimacy while the well-spaced tables ensured privacy. She arrived elegantly dressed as always, her appearance impeccable down to the last detail. If I hadn't seen the slight cracks in her facade during our video call, I might have believed nothing had changed. "Natalie," she greeted me with air. Kisses that didn't quite connect. "You're looking well. Cambridge agrees with you." "It does," I confirmed as we settled at our table. "The new space feels right." We navigated aperitifs and appetizers with polite conversation about mutual acquaintances and the changing Boston landscape. Only after our main courses arrived did she broach more substantive topics. "I understand you met with Vanessa yesterday," she said, delicately cutting into her chicken piccata. "We had coffee," I confirmed. "It was a productive conversation." "She seemed affected by it," my mother observed carefully. "Said you both agreed to try building a different kind of relationship." "We're exploring that possibility," I acknowledged. "With appropriate expectations and boundaries." She nodded, taking a sip of her wine. "That's mature of you both. Family connections matter, regardless of past difficulties." I noticed her careful avoidance of words like betrayal or manipulation. Her tendency to sanitize messy emotional realities into palatable difficulties that could be managed with proper social protocols. "How are you handling Ryan's continued presence in legal circles?" she asked, changing subjects with practiced smoothness. "I understand there's been some awkwardness." "I've arranged my consulting work to minimize potential overlap," I replied. "But honestly, I'm not particularly concerned about encountering him. That chapter is firmly closed." She studied me with new interest. "You truly have moved beyond it, haven't you? The hurt, the anger." "Not beyond, exactly," I corrected. "Those emotions were real and valid. But I've integrated them into a larger understanding of who I am and what I want. They no longer define my choices." "And what do you want?" she asked, the question surprisingly direct for my typically oblique mother. "A life that honors all parts of who I am," I said simply. "My legal expertise, my creativity, my values, relationships, based on mutual respect rather than strategic advantage. Work that engages me fully rather than just building an impressive resume." She was quiet for a moment, considering my words with unusual thoughtfulness. "You know, you've always been the one I worried about most," she said finally. "Vanessa played by the rules, my rules, society's rules. She was predictable. But you—" She shook her head slightly. "You always questioned everything, always insisted on finding your own way." It terrified me. The admission surprised me. "Why?" "Because the rules protect you," she said, as if explaining something obvious. "Following the expected path, prestigious career, advantageous marriage, the right connections, creates security, stability." She hesitated. "I wanted that safety for you." For perhaps the first time, I glimpsed the fear underlying my mother's rigid adherence to social conventions. Not just ambition or snobbery, but genuine concern that deviating from the prescribed path would leave her daughters vulnerable to life's uncertainties. "I understand that intention," I said carefully. "But security built on pretense isn't really secure. It's a house of cards." "Perhaps," she acknowledged with unexpected grace. "Your father and I followed all the rules. Harvard Law, prestigious firms, the right clubs and connections. And when he left me for his yoga instructor at 52, none of those things protected me from humiliation or financial anxiety." The reference to my father's departure 15 years earlier stunned me. We never discussed it directly. It was always obliquely referenced as "your father's midlife realignment," or some equally sanitized phrase. "Is that why you pushed us so hard along conventional paths?" I asked. "Fear that we'd end up vulnerable like you did?" She adjusted her napkin precisely. "That's a rather simplistic psychological analysis, Natalie, but not entirely inaccurate." She met my eyes directly. "I wanted you both to be the kind of women who would never need a man, but would always attract the right kind. Self-sufficient, but strategically connected. And now we're both breaking from that mold in different ways," I observed. "Indeed," she sighed. "Vanessa moving across the country, you becoming a novelist." She pronounced the word with complex intonation, not quite disapproving, but certainly uncertain. "It's not what I envisioned." "But we're both choosing our paths consciously now," I pointed out. "Not just reacting to expectations or assumptions. There's strength in that." She considered this, tilting her head slightly. "Perhaps so. Time will tell which approach serves you better in the long run." It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that we were charting our own courses with intention, rather than recklessly abandoning convention. From my mother, that constituted significant progress. As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, she touched my arm lightly. "I don't approve of all your choices, Natalie, but I respect your right to make them, and I'm proud of your resilience. You've handled this past year with remarkable grace." Coming from my mother, this qualified as effusive praise. I accepted it with a simple thank you rather than qualifying or dismissing it as I might have in the past. Our goodbye outside the restaurant was cordial if not warm. A polite hug, promises to stay in touch, acknowledgement that our relationship was evolving into something neither of us fully understood yet, but were cautiously willing to explore. The final piece of my Boston reconciliation circuit came 2 days later, when I visited Collins and Westfield for a consultation on the Montgomery case. I'd prepared thoroughly, reviewing all case documents and preparing strategic recommendations that leveraged my specific expertise while reflecting my limited ongoing involvement. The firm's offices felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The same elegant decor and hushed efficiency, but now experienced from the perspective of a visitor rather than a resident. Junior associates nodded respectfully as I passed, aware of my new consulting status but unsure how to categorize me in the firm's strict hierarchy. Gerald met me personally, ushering me into a conference room where several other attorneys were already assembled. I noticed their curious glances. Word of my transformation from rising star associate to novelist, with a consulting arrangement, had clearly circulated through the office grapevine. "Natalie, welcome back," Gerald said as we settled around the table. "We're eager to hear your perspective on the Montgomery situation." The meeting proceeded smoothly. My recommendations received with the same respect they would have commanded when I was on partnership track. I found I could still access my legal analysis skills with precision while maintaining the broader perspective I'd developed during my time away. As the meeting concluded, Gerald asked me to stay behind. Once we were alone, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with genuine curiosity. "You look well, Natalie. Different, but well. The writing life agrees with you?" "It does," I confirmed. "Though I appreciate maintaining this connection to legal work. The balance feels right." He nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your novel is progressing? Something in the legal thriller genre?" "Yes, it's with my agent now. We're working through final revisions before submission to publishers." "Well, when it's published, be sure to let us know. We'll want signed copies for the firm library," he said with a smile. "And perhaps you'd consider doing a reading here? Many of the associates would be interested, I think." The offer touched. A validation of my new path from someone whose opinion I genuinely respected. "I'd like that," I replied. "Thank you." As Gerald walked me out, we passed through the associate bullpen where I'd once spent countless hours. The space was largely empty, most attorneys in meetings or court, but one office was occupied, Ryan's. Our eyes met briefly through the glass partition, his widening in surprise at my presence. I nodded politely, acknowledging his existence, without stopping, and continued my conversation with Gerald. The brief exchange lasted only seconds, but in that moment I realized something profound. I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no lingering attachment. Ryan had become just another face in my professional sphere, stripped of emotional significance. "Everything all right?" Gerald asked, noticing my momentary distraction. "Perfect," I replied honestly. "Just realizing how much has changed." "For the better, I'd say," he observed. "You were always one of our most promising associates, Natalie. But now you seem more authentically yourself. It suits you." Outside the building, I paused, on the sidewalk, looking up at the office tower where I'd once imagined spending my entire career. The glossy windows reflected the autumn sky, clouds moving rapidly in the brisk October breeze. Just like those clouds, I was moving forward, not running away from my past but flowing naturally toward my future. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Just got a request for the full manuscript from Parkview Press. Editor loved the sample chapters." I smiled, tucking the phone back into my pocket as I started walking toward the T station. The timing felt perfect. This first expression of publisher interest coming just as I'd completed my circuit of reconciliation with Boston and its inhabitants. The prenup I'd brought to the ceremony had set everything in motion, exposing Ryan's true nature, freeing Vanessa from a fraudulent marriage, liberating me from a life constrained by others' expectations. But it was the choices I'd made afterward that had truly transformed me. Choosing to pursue my writing, choosing to build authentic relationships, choosing to define success on my own terms. I'd returned to Boston not as the wounded victim of betrayal, but as someone who had integrated that experience into a stronger, more authentic self. I'd faced my mother, my sister, my ex-fiancé, and my former workplace with clarity and composure, neither seeking their approval nor running from their judgment. The prenup had been the catalyst, but I had been the alchemist, transforming pain into purpose, betrayal into breakthrough, ending into beginning. And now, as I navigated the familiar streets with new eyes, I recognized that the most significant confrontation had not been with any external person or institution, but with the version of myself that had allowed others to define my worth and dictate my choices. That confrontation was complete. That chapter was closed. The future beckoned, unwritten but vibrant with possibility. And that brings us to today's guest, Natalie Patterson, whose debut legal thriller Fraudulent Intent has spent 6 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Natalie, welcome to the program. The radio host's voice was warm in my earpiece as I sat in the small recording booth, adjusting my microphone nervously. Despite having done several interviews in the 3 months since my book's publication, the surreal nature of being introduced as a best-selling author hadn't fully faded. "Thank you for having me, Rachel," I replied, remembering Hannah's coaching. To smile while speaking, even on radio. "It's a pleasure to be here." Your novel follows prosecutor Claire Donovan as she uncovers a white-collar fraud scheme with personal connections to her own life. The Washington Post called it a rare, legal thriller that balances courtroom drama with authentic emotional depth. What inspired this story? I gave my practiced response about blending my legal background with an interest in exploring how people rationalize unethical choices, careful not to draw explicit parallels to my personal experience. But as the interview progressed, Rachel's questions grew more perceptive. There's a fascinating moment when Claire discovers her colleague, who she's been romantically involved with, has been complicit in the fraud scheme, Rachel noted. Rather than exposing him immediately, she develops a strategy to use their relationship to gather evidence. It's morally complex territory. How did you approach writing that ethical dilemma? I wanted to explore the tension between justice and revenge, I replied, more candidly than I'd spoken in previous interviews. When someone betrays you, there's a natural impulse toward punishment. But Claire recognizes that acting from that impulse would compromise her own integrity. She has to find a path that serves justice without becoming the kind of person who uses relationships strategically. That's quite different from most legal thrillers, where the protagonists often engage in questionable methods without much moral reflection, Rachel observed. "I think we're hungry for stories where people make difficult but principled choices," I said, "where the win isn't just achieving a desired outcome, but maintaining your core values in the process." After the interview concluded, I stepped out into the Boston spring sunshine, checking my phone to find a text from Hannah. "Fantastic. Job. Called you on your cell since the radio station line was busy." Simon loved the interview too. "Call me when you can. Paperback details to discuss." Simon Knight, my editor at Parkview Press, had become one of my strongest professional allies over the past year. He'd championed my manuscript through the acquisition process, fought for a substantial marketing budget, and consistently pushed me to deepen the emotional complexity of the story while maintaining the page-turning urgency of the plot. The book's success had exceeded everyone's expectations. Strong reviews, solid sales that built steadily through word of mouth, and now serious interest from film producers about adaptation rights. The surreal quality of this new chapter in my life hadn't diminished, but I'd grown more comfortable inhabiting it. I walked the few blocks to my Cambridge apartment, now furnished with additions that reflected my literary success, framed copies of my book in multiple languages, a sleek, new laptop for writing, bookcases that had expanded to fill previously empty corners. But the writing desk still commanded the bay window alcove, currently holding the printed manuscript of my second novel, halfway through revisions. My phone rang just as I was settling at that desk, ready to tackle the afternoon's writing goals. Diane's name lit up the screen. "I just heard you on W. Burr," she exclaimed when I answered. "You sounded so poised, so authorial." I laughed at her characterization. Is that a word? Authorial? It is now, she declared, and perfectly descriptive of how you've evolved. Remember when we had breakfast the day after you got back from Sea Pines? You were confident but still tentative about this new identity. Now you own it completely. Her observation resonated. The past year had been a gradual process of fully inhabiting this new life I'd created, not just the professional aspects of being a published author, but the personal dimension of defining myself on my own terms. Speaking of evolution, Diane continued, did you see the announcement about Ryan? No, I replied, curiosity rather than anxiety coloring my response. What announcement? He's leaving Boston, taking a position with a firm in Chicago. Apparently, his judicial aspirations here have stalled. She paused meaningfully. Rumor has it that certain revelations about his approach to career advancement made the rounds in the right circles. I absorbed this information with mild interest, but no particular satisfaction. Interesting. I hope he finds what he's looking for there. That's it? Diane sounded disappointed. No schadenfreude? No victory lap? Honestly, no, I replied. His path doesn't intersect with mine anymore. What happens to him just doesn't matter to me. We chatted for a few more minutes before ending the call, agreeing to meet for dinner later in the week to celebrate my book's continued success. As I returned to my manuscript, I reflected on how genuinely indifferent I felt about Ryan's departure. The emotional hold he'd once had on me had dissolved so completely that news about his life registered as merely interesting information, not something that affected my sense of self or vindication. That evening, I received an unexpected FaceTime call from Vanessa. We'd maintained sporadic contact since her move to San Francisco, occasional video chats and text messages that were cordial, if not deeply intimate. Each conversation revealed a bit more of the people we were becoming rather than the rivalrous sisters we'd been. Congratulations on 6 weeks on the list, she said when I answered. Her background showed what appeared to be a photography studio, equipment visible behind her. Simon sent me a copy, and I finally had time to read it this week. It's really good, Natalie. Not just commercial good, but genuinely insightful. Thank you, I replied, touched by her praise. How's the photography going? Her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. I just landed my first gallery showing. Small place in the Mission District, but they're featuring my urban landscape series next month. Vanessa, that's amazing, I said sincerely. Send me the details. I might be in San Francisco for a book event around then. I'd love to see it. I will, she promised. And this is slightly awkward, but Mother mentioned she hasn't heard from you in a while, since the book launch party, I think. I sighed, slightly guilty. My mother had attended my launch event at a prominent Boston bookstore, visibly proud despite her lingering uncertainty about my career change. We'd shared an unexpectedly warm moment when she'd admitted the book was actually quite compelling, high praise from a woman who considered John Grisham airport reading. But our communication had indeed been sparse since then. I should call her, I acknowledged. Things have been hectic with the publicity schedule, but that's not a good excuse. Vanessa's expression was understanding rather than judgmental. She's trying, in her way. She actually defended your career choice at the Williamsons' dinner party last month. Said something about how publishing was a more stable industry than law these days. She smiled wryly. It was her version of maternal pride. We chatted for a few more minutes before saying goodbye, the conversation easier and more genuine than our interactions had been for most of our lives. The competitive edge that had always defined our relationship had been replaced by something quieter, not close friendship, but mutual respect and cautious interest in each other's evolving lives. After we disconnected, I found myself reflecting on all the relationships that had transformed in the wake of that fateful wedding day. My mother and I had established a new understanding, still formal in many ways, but with occasional glimpses of unexpected honesty. She'd never explicitly apologized for her role in Ryan and Vanessa's betrayal, but she'd acknowledged it obliquely by never questioning my boundaries around family gatherings or attempting to minimize what had happened. Vanessa and I were building something neither of us had vocabulary for. Not the close sisterhood depicted in greeting cards, but a tentative connection based on growing self-awareness and mutual recognition of past patterns we were both working to change. Our shared history gave our conversations a shorthand that strangers wouldn't have, while our geographical distance provided space for each of us to continue evolving independently. My relationship with Diane had deepened, evolving from workplace friendship to something more akin to chosen family. She'd been the first reader of my manuscript's final draft, the person who'd held my hand during the nerve-wracking auction for publication rights, and a steadfast supporter through the disorienting transition from lawyer to author. My connection to Collins and Westfield had stabilized into a comfortable consulting arrangement, with Gerald occasionally sending cases my way that benefited from my specific expertise. The firm had hosted a well-attended book signing for my novel's release, many attorneys genuinely curious about my transition to writing and the parallels between legal work and fiction. The most profound change, however, was in my relationship with myself. The woman who had stood frozen in her parents' hallway, overhearing her mother's betrayal, would hardly recognize the person I'd become, someone who trusted her own judgment, who valued authenticity over strategic advantage, who defined success on her own terms rather than through others' validation. The prenup I'd brought to the ceremony had been the catalyst for this transformation, but the true alchemy had occurred in the choices I'd made afterward. Choosing to pursue my creative passion despite its risks, choosing to form relationships based on mutual respect rather than advantage, choosing to integrate rather than deny the painful truths about my family dynamics. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Draft due to Simon in 2 weeks. I smiled, turning to the manuscript on my desk. My second novel followed a new character, but explored similar themes of ethical choices and personal integrity in a world that often rewarded strategic manipulation. The writing flowed more naturally now, my voice stronger and more confident than when I'd started my first book at Sea Pines. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk, not a personal picture, but the cover of my novel. The title, Fraudulent. Intent was emblazoned across the top in bold letters, my name prominent beneath it. The image wasn't just a professional achievement, but a symbol of personal reclamation. The moment I'd stopped being defined by what had happened to me and started defining myself through what I created from that experience. The prenup I'd brought to my sister's wedding had exposed a fraud and prevented a marriage built on calculation rather than love. But the true gift of that painful day wasn't the schadenfreude of revenge or even the satisfaction of protecting Vanessa from Ryan's deception. It was the liberation from a life I'd been living according to others' expectations, a life that, I now realized, had been its own kind of fraudulent intent. As I settled into my writing for the evening, words flowing onto the page with confidence and clarity, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the painful catalyst that had set me free. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals create the most transformative opportunities, not because pain itself has value, but because it forces us to question the foundations we've built our lives upon and rebuild with greater authenticity. The prenup had exposed the fraud in Ryan and Vanessa's relationship, but more importantly, it had revealed the subtle fraud I'd been perpetrating against myself, pretending to be content with a life that honored only one part of who I was, accepting others' definitions of success rather than creating my own. A year after returning to Boston, I'd found something far more valuable than revenge or vindication. I'd found integration, a life that honored all aspects of who I was, relationships based on authentic connection rather than strategic advantage, work that engaged my full self rather than just my credentials. I'd brought a prenup to my sister's wedding, intending it as an instrument of truth in a ceremony built on deception. I couldn't have imagined then how that simple action would ripple through all our lives, creating space for painful but necessary reckonings and ultimately, for genuine transformation. The story that had begun with betrayal had evolved into something far more meaningful than revenge. A journey toward authentic selfhood, toward relationships based on truth rather than convenience, toward a life defined by personal integrity rather than external validation. And that, I reflected as I continued writing into the evening, was a story worth telling. D. Are you nervous about seeing them? Less than I expected, I replied honestly. I'm meeting Vanessa for coffee this afternoon, Mother for dinner tomorrow, even scheduled a consultation at the firm on Thursday. The full gauntlet, Diane, raised her eyebrows. Brave woman. Not brave, I corrected. Just ready. These are all loose ends that need tying up before I can fully move forward. The coffee shop where I'd arranged to meet Vanessa was deliberately neutral territory. Neither a place we'd frequented together, nor anywhere associated with my former life with Ryan. I arrived early, selecting a quiet corner table with a view of the door, my defensive instincts still active enough to prefer watching her approach rather than being surprised. When she entered precisely at 3, I was struck by subtle changes in her appearance. Still elegantly dressed in a tailored pantsuit, her hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders rather than the mid-back length she'd maintained for years. She looked polished, but somehow less rigid, scanning the room with nervous energy rather than her usual calculated confidence. Her eyes found mine, and she approached with a tentative smile. Not the practiced social smile she'd perfected for professional settings, but something more uncertain. "Natalie," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "Thank you for meeting me. You look really well." "Thanks," I replied simply. "You too. The shorter hair suits you." Her hand went to the ends of her hair self-consciously. Change seemed appropriate, given everything else changing in my life. We ordered coffee, navigating awkward small talk about the weather and my new apartment until the server departed. Then Vanessa took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders in a gesture so familiar it brought an unexpected pang of recognition. The same posture adjustment she'd made before difficult cross-examinations in law school mock trials. "I meant what I said in my email," she began. "Thank you for what you did at the wedding. It was humiliating in the moment, but—" She paused, carefully choosing her words. "It saved me from a much longer, more painful humiliation." "Have you heard from Ryan since then?" I asked, curious despite myself. A flicker of something, anger perhaps, crossed her face. "He tried to reconnect about a month after the wedding, suggesting we talk things through. When I declined, he implied I was being hysterical about routine professional networking conversations." She shook her head, as if discussing how my family connections would advance. His judicial aspirations was just normal career planning. "That sounds like Ryan," I observed dryly, always able to rationalize his behavior. "I keep thinking about how long it might have taken me to discover the truth if you hadn't brought those documents," she said quietly. "Years, maybe. After I'd helped advance his career, introduced him to all my connections, invested everything in our partnership." She met my eyes directly. "You could have let it happen. Many people would have, for revenge." The observation hung between us, acknowledging the complicated truth at the heart of my actions. I could have stayed silent, letting Vanessa marry a man who viewed her as a career stepping stone, exacting a twisted revenge for her betrayal. "That wouldn't have been justice," I said finally. "Just another form of calculation. I didn't want to be that person." "No," she agreed. "You never were. That was always the difference between us. Mother called it your weakness, that you wouldn't play the game, wouldn't strategize relationships. But it's actually your strength." The acknowledgement, coming from Vanessa of all people, struck me deeply. For years, my mother and sister had viewed my straightforward nature as a liability, my unwillingness to trade relationships like social currency as a failure to understand how the world worked. Now Vanessa was reframing it as an asset. "Why San Francisco?" I asked, changing the subject to something less emotionally charged. "A fresh start," she replied. "An offer from Hayes and Thornton. They've been expanding their West Coast presence. But also," she hesitated, "distance from mother's influence, from the expectations I've been trying to live up to since childhood." "I can understand that motivation," I said with unexpected sympathy. "I've been thinking a lot about the dynamic between us growing up," Vanessa continued, rotating her coffee cup slowly between her hands. "How mother always positioned us as competitors rather than sisters. How I leaned into that, believing there was only room for one successful daughter." "The golden child versus the disappointment," I said, naming the dynamic that had shaped our relationship for decades. "Except you were never actually a disappointment," she acknowledged. "You just refused to play by her rules. And that threatened both of us, because it challenged the framework we operated within." The insight surprised me, not just for its accuracy, but for Vanessa's willingness to voice it. This level of self-awareness and honesty was something I'd never witnessed from my sister before. "What changed?" I asked. "You've never been one for introspection." She smiled ruefully. "Nearly marrying someone who valued me only for my strategic utility was quite the wake-up call. It made me reconsider a lot of my choices, personal and professional." She paused. "I've been seeing a therapist. Mother would be horrified if she knew." The confession startled a laugh from me. "Good for you." "I did some therapy after law school. Mother found out and suggested I lacked the natural resilience of the Patterson women." "God, that sounds exactly like her." Vanessa shook her head. "Always framing vulnerability as weakness." The conversation shifted into unexpectedly honest territory, comparing notes on our upbringing and the complicated legacy of our mother's values. For the first time, we spoke as equals rather than rivals, acknowledging the harmful patterns that had shaped us while recognizing our respective responsibilities in perpetuating them. "I am truly sorry about Ryan," Vanessa said as our coffees cooled. "Not just for the betrayal itself, but for how I rationalized it. I told myself you'd recover, find someone else, that it wasn't really hurting you because you'd be better off in the long run." She shook her head. "The mental gymnastics were impressive, even to me." "I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt," I replied honestly. "It did, devastatingly. But in retrospect, you might have been right about one thing. I am better off now." "You seem it," she agreed. "I barely recognized you when you walked in. Not physically, but energetically. You've changed." "Sea Pines was transformative," I acknowledged. Having space to reconnect with myself beyond relationships and career expectations. "Mother mentioned something about writing?" Vanessa asked, her tone carefully neutral. I nodded, deciding to share the full truth. "I finished a novel. It's being revised now for submission to publishers. I've signed with a literary agent." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "That's impressive. Fiction was always your strength, even in school." "I remember that short story you wrote that won the state prize senior year." The memory surprised me. I'd forgotten that achievement myself, having long ago filed away creative writing as an impractical pursuit. The fact that Vanessa remembered it, had perhaps even valued it, shifted something in my perception of our shared history. "What about you?" I asked. "Is the move to San Francisco purely professional, or are you exploring other changes too?" A slight flush colored her cheeks. "I've actually been taking photography classes. Something I've been interested in since college but never pursued because it wasn't serious enough." The revelation of this hidden interest, one I'd never known about despite growing up in the same household, underscored how little we'd actually known each other beyond the competitive personas we'd projected. As we prepared to leave, Vanessa hesitated. "I don't expect us to suddenly become close sisters. Too much has happened for that kind of simple resolution." But maybe we could try something else. A relationship based on who we're becoming rather than who we were. The offer was tentative, genuine in a way I'd rarely experienced from her. I considered it seriously, weighing the potential value against the risk of further hurt. "I'd like to try," I said finally. Cautiously, honestly, with appropriate boundaries. "But yes, I'd like to know who you're becoming." Her smile held relief in something that looked almost like hope. "I'll email you when I'm settled in San Francisco. Maybe we can FaceTime occasionally?" "I'd like that," I agreed, surprised to discover I meant it. Walking back to my apartment, I reflected on the unexpected outcome of our meeting. I'd anticipated formality, perhaps a carefully negotiated peace for the sake of family appearances. Instead, I'd glimpsed a Vanessa I barely recognized, self-aware, apologetic, actively working to change patterns she'd recognized as destructive. Whether this transformation would last remained to be seen. People could change fundamentally, as I had, but they could also revert to old patterns when convenient. Time would tell which path Vanessa would ultimately choose. The dinner with my mother the following evening proved less transformative, but no less important for closure. We met at Sorellina, her favorite Italian restaurant downtown, where the muted lighting and excellent wine list encouraged the illusion of intimacy, while the well-spaced tables ensured privacy. She arrived elegantly dressed as always, her appearance impeccable down to the last detail. If I hadn't seen the slight cracks in her facade during our video call, I might have believed nothing had changed. "Natalie," she greeted me with air, kisses that didn't quite connect. "You're looking well. Cambridge agrees with you." "It does," I confirmed as we settled at our table. "The new space feels right." We navigated aperitifs and appetizers with polite conversation about mutual acquaintances and the changing Boston landscape. Only after our main courses arrived did she broach more substantive topics. "I understand you met with Vanessa yesterday," she said, delicately cutting into her chicken piccata. "We had coffee," I confirmed. "It was a productive conversation." "She seemed affected by it," my mother observed carefully. "Said you both agreed to try building a different kind of relationship." "We're exploring that possibility," I acknowledged. "With appropriate expectations and boundaries." She nodded, taking a sip of her wine. "That's mature of you both. Family connections matter, regardless of past difficulties." I noticed her careful avoidance of words like betrayal or manipulation. Her tendency to sanitize messy emotional realities into palatable difficulties that could be managed with proper social protocols. "How are you handling Ryan's continued presence in legal circles?" she asked, changing subjects with practiced smoothness. "I understand there's been some awkwardness." "I've arranged my consulting work to minimize potential overlap," I replied. "But honestly, I'm not particularly concerned about encountering him. That chapter is firmly closed." She studied me with new interest. "You truly have moved beyond it, haven't you? The hurt, the anger." "Not beyond exactly," I corrected. "Those emotions were real and valid. But I've integrated them into a larger understanding of who I am and what I want. They no longer define my choices." "And what do you want?" she asked, the question surprisingly direct for my typically oblique mother. "A life that honors all." "Parts of who I am," I said simply. "My legal expertise, my creativity, my values. Relationships based on mutual respect rather than strategic advantage. Work that engages me fully rather than just building an impressive resume." She was quiet for a moment, considering my words with unusual thoughtfulness. "You know, you've always been the one I worried about most," she said finally. "Vanessa played by the rules. My rules, society's rules. She was predictable, but you—" She shook her head slightly. "You always questioned everything, always insisted on finding your own way. It terrified me." The admission surprised me. Why? Because the rules protect you, she said, as if explaining something obvious. Following the expected path, prestigious, career, advantageous marriage, the right connections, creates security, stability. She hesitated. I wanted that safety for you. For perhaps the first time, I glimpsed the fear underlying my mother's rigid adherence to social conventions. Not just ambition or snobbery, but genuine concern that deviating from the prescribed path would leave her daughters vulnerable to life's uncertainties. I understand that intention, I said carefully, but security built on pretense isn't really secure. It's a house of cards. Perhaps, she acknowledged with unexpected grace. Your father and I followed all the rules. Harvard law, prestigious firms, the right clubs and connections. And when he left me for his yoga instructor at 52, none of those things protected me from humiliation or financial anxiety. The reference to my father's departure 15 years earlier stunned me. We never discussed it directly. It was always obliquely referenced as, your father's midlife realignment, or some equally sanitized phrase. Is that why you pushed us so hard along conventional paths? I asked. Fear that we'd end up vulnerable. Like you did? She adjusted her napkin precisely. That's a rather simplistic psychological analysis, Natalie, but not entirely inaccurate. She met my eyes directly. I wanted you both to be the kind of women who would never need a man, but would always attract the right kind. Self-sufficient, but strategically connected. And now we're both breaking from that mold in different ways, I observed. Indeed, she sighed. Vanessa moving across the country, you becoming a novelist. She pronounced the word with complex intonation, not quite disapproving but certainly uncertain. It's not what I envisioned. But we're both choosing our paths consciously now, I pointed out. Not just reacting to expectations or assumptions. There's strength in that. She considered this, tilting her head slightly. Perhaps so. Time will tell which approach serves you better in the long run. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that we were charting our own courses with intention rather than recklessly abandoning convention. From my mother, that constituted significant progress. As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, she touched my arm lightly. I don't approve of all your choices, Natalie, but I respect your right to make them. And I'm proud of your resilience. You've handled this past year with remarkable grace. Coming from my mother, this qualified as effusive praise. I accepted it with a simple thank you, rather than qualifying or dismissing it as I might have in the past. Our goodbye outside the restaurant was cordial if not warm. A polite hug, promises to stay in touch, acknowledgement that our relationship was evolving into something neither of us fully understood yet, but were cautiously willing to explore. The final piece of my Boston reconciliation circuit came 2 days later, when I visited Collins and Westfield for a consultation on the Montgomery case. I'd prepared thoroughly, reviewing all case documents and preparing strategic recommendations that leveraged my specific expertise while reflecting my limited ongoing involvement. The firm's offices felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, the same elegant decor and hushed efficiency, but now experienced from the perspective of a visitor, rather than a resident. Junior associates nodded respectfully as I passed, aware of my new consulting status but unsure how to categorize me in the firm's strict hierarchy. Gerald met me personally, ushering me into a conference room where several other attorneys were already assembled. I noticed their curious glances. Word of my transformation from rising star associate to novelist with a consulting arrangement had clearly circulated through the office grapevine. Natalie, welcome back, Gerald said as we settled around the table. We're eager to hear your perspective on the Montgomery situation. The meeting proceeded smoothly, my recommendations received with the same respect they would have commanded when I was on partnership track. I found I could still access my legal analysis skills with precision while maintaining the broader perspective I'd developed during my time away. As the meeting concluded, Gerald asked me to stay behind. Once we were alone, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with genuine curiosity. "You look well, Natalie. Different, but well. The writing life agrees with you?" "It does," I confirmed. "Though I appreciate maintaining this connection to legal work, the balance feels right." He nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your novel is progressing? Something in the legal thriller genre?" "Yes, it's with my agent now. We're working through final revisions before submission to publishers." "Well, when it's published, be sure to let us know. We'll want signed copies for the firm library," he said with a smile. "And perhaps you'd consider doing a reading here? Many of the associates would be interested, I think." The offer touched me, a validation of my new path from someone whose opinion I genuinely respected. "I'd like that," I replied. "Thank you." As Gerald walked me out, we passed through the associate bullpen where I'd once spent countless hours. The space was largely empty, most attorneys in meetings or court, but one office was occupied, Ryan's. Our eyes met briefly through the glass partition, his widening in surprise at my presence. I nodded politely, acknowledging his existence, without stopping, and continued my conversation with Gerald. The brief exchange lasted only seconds, but in that moment I realized something profound. I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no lingering attachment. Ryan had become just another face in my professional sphere, stripped of emotional significance. "Everything all right?" Gerald asked, noticing my momentary distraction. "Perfect," I replied honestly. "Just realizing how much has changed." "For the better, I'd say," he observed. "You were always one of our most promising associates, Natalie. But now you seem more authentically yourself. It suits you." Outside the building, I paused, on the sidewalk, looking up at the office tower where I'd once imagined spending my entire career. The glossy windows reflected the autumn sky, clouds moving rapidly in the brisk October breeze. Just like those clouds, I was moving forward, not running away from my past, but flowing naturally toward my future. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Just got a request for the full manuscript from Parkview Press. Editor loved the sample chapters." I smiled, tucking the phone back into my pocket as I started walking toward the T station. The timing felt perfect. This first expression of publisher interest coming just as I'd completed my circuit of reconciliation with Boston and its inhabitants. The prenup I'd brought to the ceremony had set everything in motion, exposing Ryan's true nature, freeing Vanessa from a fraudulent marriage, liberating me from a life constrained by others' expectations. But it was the choices I'd made afterward that had truly transformed me. Choosing to pursue my writing, choosing to build authentic relationships, choosing to define success on my own terms. I'd returned to Boston not as the wounded victim of betrayal, but as someone who had integrated that experience into a stronger, more authentic self. I'd faced my mother, my sister, my ex-fiancé, and my former workplace with clarity and composure, neither seeking their approval nor running from their judgment. The prenup had been the catalyst, but I had been the alchemist, transforming pain into purpose, betrayal into breakthrough, ending into beginning. And now, as I navigated the familiar streets with new eyes, I recognized that the most significant confrontation had not been with any external person or institution, but with the version of myself that had allowed others to define my worth and dictate my choices. That confrontation was complete. That chapter was closed. The future beckoned, unwritten but vibrant with possibility. Glimpsed the fear underlying my mother's rigid adherence to social conventions. Not just ambition or snobbery, but genuine concern that deviating from the prescribed path would leave her daughters vulnerable to life's uncertainties. "I understand that intention," I said carefully. But security built on pretense isn't really secure. It's a house of cards. Perhaps, she acknowledged with unexpected grace. Your father and I followed all the rules. Harvard Law, prestigious firms, the right clubs and connections. And when he left me for his yoga instructor at 52, none of those things protected me from humiliation or financial anxiety. The reference to my father's departure 15 years earlier stunned me. We never discussed it directly. It was always obliquely referenced as your father's midlife realignment, or some equally sanitized phrase. Is that why you pushed us so hard along conventional paths? I asked. Fear that we'd end up vulnerable like you did? She adjusted her napkin precisely. That's a rather simplistic psychological analysis, Natalie. But not entirely inaccurate. She met my eyes directly. I wanted you both to be the kind of women who would never need a man but would always attract the right kind. Self-sufficient but strategically connected. And now we're both breaking from that mold in different ways, I observed. Indeed, she sighed. Vanessa moving across the country, you becoming a novelist. She pronounced the word with complex intonation, not quite disapproving, but certainly uncertain. It's not what I envisioned. But we're both choosing our paths consciously now, I pointed out. Not just reacting to expectations or assumptions. There's strength in that. She considered this, tilting her head slightly. Perhaps so. Time will tell which approach serves you better in the long run. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition that we were charting our own courses with intention, rather than recklessly abandoning convention. From my mother, that constituted significant progress. As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, she touched my arm lightly. I don't approve of all your choices, Natalie, but I respect your right to make them, and I'm proud of your resilience. You've handled this past year with remarkable grace. Coming from my mother, this qualified as effusive praise. I accepted it with a simple, thank you, rather than qualifying or dismissing it as I might have in the past. Our goodbye. Outside, the restaurant was cordial if not warm. A polite hug, promises to stay in touch, acknowledgement that our relationship was evolving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.